may be eligible for $2,500 in grant funding. Programs designed to provide relief to communities hardest hit microbusinesses and entrepreneurs. Applications are open through March 25th at mynevadacounty.com/coronavirus/businesses. Thank you.
Carissa, thank you so much. I'm glad that we'll still get to work closely with you. Would anyone else like to make a public comment on item 4.0 tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment and move right into our presentations. Our first presentation this evening is our March as Meals on Wheels Month Proclamation. Ms. Sharon Romack, I would love to have you join me at the podium for this. Okay, it is my honor to read this proclamation this evening. Whereas during the month of March 2022, Meals on Wheels America is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Older American Act of 1965, being signed into law, which created a national nutrition program for individuals 60 years and older, the Meals on Wheels program in the United States. And whereas Sierra Senior Services is a proud affiliate of Meals on Wheels America. And whereas Sierra Senior Services has provided this unduplicated service in the Truckee, North Lake Tahoe area for the past 20 years that has enabled at-risk older adults to continue living independently thanks to daily good nutrition. And whereas community volunteers are the driving force behind Sierra Senior Services' mission by delivering fresh, hot meals and a friendly smile to the senior homebound population. And whereas, for the past 20 years, Sierra Senior Services has made a significant impact on food insecurity on behalf of older adults in the community that has reduced hospital stays, readmissions, and enabled older adults to take a proactive stance on their own health to help them remain independent as long as possible. And whereas the Truckee community is grateful for the ongoing dedication to the well-being of Truckee, North Lake Tahoe's older residents and congratulates the Sierra Senior Services on 20 years of service and caring in our community. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the mayor of the town of Truckee that March 2022 is a month to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Older Americans Act nutrition program and urge every community member to take this time to honor the Meals on Wheels program and Sierra Senior Services, the seniors they serve, and the volunteers who care for them.
Great.
There you go.
Thank you.
We'll do a quick photo right there.
Right
There you go. And Ms. Romack, I would invite you to say a few words as well.
Great, thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you to the town of Truckee for their support. For the past 20 years, we've been located here, and I would say the last 2 years have been the most exciting in the whole span of that 20 years. With the town's help, we've more than doubled our capacity, and we have now about 185 people that we serve meals to every day. But we're more than a meal. As the proclamation said, we give them a smile, we check and make sure everybody's okay, and the service we provide is unlike any other. Now, pretend there's about 35, 40 other people up here with me because we could not do this without our volunteers. They keep us going. They are willing to shuffle around. They fill in when there's routes missing, and they really keep us going. So this also goes out to all our volunteers, and we thank not just the ones from this year, but the ones that have been with us for the past 20 years. So thank you very much. I appreciate being recognized by the community, and Sierra Senior Services will be here at least 20 more years, maybe even longer. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I say
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon, thank you again for your tireless work and all of the work of your volunteers. And I am very much looking forward to our ride-along later this month as well. So with that, we will move on to item 5.2, a presentation for International Women's Day. And Bron, I believe you're going to lead us in this presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. I am presenting you with a short video recognizing the leaders of our community. It's an opportunity to connect our community with our past leaders and our current leaders, and hopefully inspire young people to also take on their passions and their dreams and hopefully make an impact to their community.
From Abigail Adams to Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth to Rosa Parks, there are tremendous milestones of progress and accomplishments in women's history that stretch back to the founding of the United States. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter declared the week of March 2nd to March 8th National Women's History Week. He recognized that women throughout history had been just as impactful in building America into a great nation, despite their contributions being unsung and unnoticed. He went on to say that the achievements, leadership, courage, strength, and love of the women who built America was as vital as that of the men whose names we know so well. In 1987, National Women's History Week was expanded to National Women's History Month. Today, we want to recognize the contributions of all the strong female leaders that have been pivotal in building Truckee into the town it is today. In 1993, the town of Truckee became incorporated. 27 people ran to be on the first town council. Despite being the only female to be elected on the original council, Kathleen Egan was chosen by her peers to be the town's first mayor. During her tenure, she oversaw funding and construction of the Glenshire Bridge, construction of the McIver Undercrossing, Truckee's first roundabout, and the paving of Jaboom Street. Miss Egan spearheaded Truckee's incorporation and is still influential in our community today. She has served as a founding board member of the Truckee River Watershed Council and Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. She also served on the Truckee Tahoe Airport District Board and was instrumental in their community outreach strategies and their efforts to support the protection of Wattle Ranch in Martis Valley. She continues to lead our community to connect and to build space for cultural, social, and educational prosperity on the board of the Friends of the Truckee Library.
Maya Snyder was the second female mayor of Truckee, and in the early 2000s recognized that women were underrepresented in local politics. She teamed up with several other women in the community to reverse this trend by encouraging more women to become politically active. Ms. Snyder enthusiastically served on a variety of council committees and activities, including the 4th of July Committee, the Nevada County Water Agency Advisory Council, the Subcommittee for the Preservation of the Yellow House, voting delegate for the League of California Cities, and the Affordable Housing Loan Committee. As mayor in 2000, she led the significant effort of bringing the community together for the Truckee Town Portrait. She also was pivotal in the creation of Truckee Day, the annual event we all continue to look forward to every year. The first event took place in 2004, and more than 500 residents pitched in and picked up 7 tons of trash. After her term on council, Ms. Snyder remained active in the community through her work for the Tall Forest Hospital Foundation and her production of the local access television show Truckee Talks, in which she hosted over 200 episodes.
Beth Ingalls led the council as mayor in 2006. During her term in office, she served on several committees, including the Citizens Waste Management Advisory, Open Space Committee, and Nevada County Solid and Hazardous Waste Committee. She was passionate about green practices. She was instrumental in creating the recycling coordinator position within the town and championed the formation of the Truckee Green Building Committee. Ms. Ingalls was mayor during the adoption of the general plan update and guided the town through its adoption on schedule and with large community support. She was also not afraid to tackle challenging region issues such as the comprehensive land use plan for the Truckee Tahoe Airport, the Martis Valley Community Plan, and the large-scale development projects proposed within the Martis Valley. As her term on council was closing, Ms. Ingalls saw the need for more climate change action on a local level and established the Truckee Climate Action Network, TCAN, a grassroots effort focused on making a positive local impact through education, legislation, conservation, and communication.
Before joining the Truckee Town Council, Barbara Green served our community on the Nevada County Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. She also served on the boards of the Truckee Donner Land Trust, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, and the League of Women Voters. She is also a founding member of the Sierra Business Council. Once elected locally in 2004, she served 2 terms and was a strong advocate for a variety of social and environmental causes. She was active in advocating for the library, our Truckee Chamber of Commerce, the Truckee River Basin Water Group, the Affordable Housing Implementation Working Group, the Truckee Donner Park and Recreation District Community Center, and the Public Business Improvement District Development Committee, just to name a few. In 2004, Ms. Green was interviewed by Sierra Sun and highlighted the importance of being a team player, not only in the community, but when working in government. She went on to note that women in government approach issues in an intuitive way and listen to concerns as they would as mothers. She is still active in community decisions and is part of the Truckee Green Team, a civic discussion and advocacy group. Joan Jones was born and raised in Truckee. She was elected to the Truckee Town Council in 2008 and served 2 terms. She led the town as mayor in 2012 and 2015. During her first term of service, the town maintained fiscal stability through the economic downturn while maintaining service levels for the community. She helped to manage the dissolution of the Town Redevelopment Agency and protected the agency's assets to construct downtown improvements. The town built the Corporation Yard, the Rail Yard Master Plan was adopted, and the town projects were designed that would compete for available funding as the economy turned around. During Ms. Jones' second term alongside Councilmember Alicia Barr, the town was able to move on miles of trail projects, including the original Truckee River Legacy Trail, Trout Creek Trail, and Todd Honor Trail. Significant new bike lanes were complete on Brockway Road, Donner Pass Road, Glenshire Drive, and West River Street. They were also central in the completion of significant streetscape projects, major improvements in the downtown core, parking and public art additions, and the advancement of the animal shelter building in partnership with Humane Society of Truckee Tahoe. Ms. Jones is a local business owner and continues to be a contributor in our community. She most recently served on the Contractors Association of Truckee Tahoe Political Action Committee, which advocates for representation of the construction industry in all levels of government. Alicia Barr is also a local business owner who has continued to give back to the community in a variety of ways, including through her business during the pandemic, in her involvement with the Truckee Roundhouse nonprofit, and as a board member of the Tahoe Forest Health System Foundation. During her term on the Truckee Town Council, she served on a number of committees, including the Storm Water Management Advisory Committee, Marketing and Visitor Services Committee, Housing Advisory Work Group, and Nevada County Library Committee. Ms. Barr was mayor in 2015. She was a champion of economic development and building a sustainable community, and she developed strong relationships with legislators across the state.
Carolyn Wallace D is the only council member who has served 3 terms for our community. She was elected as mayor in 2010, 2013, and 2018. Ms. Wallace D served on a variety of committees over her significant tenure, including the Truckee Tomorrow Steering Committee, Green Building Committee, Athlete Recognition Subcommittee, and many more. She was pivotal in transitioning the town from providing basic services to moving the community forward in important initiatives, particularly for our roadways. She was passionate about transportation advancements and worked tirelessly to bring about Truckee's Mousehole Tunnel. She was also fundamental in helping to secure significant annual transit funding from the county, which will serve our community long into our future. Ms. Wallace D continued contributions to the town on the Art Commission and the Nevada County Transportation Commission up until the end of 2020. She has been a role model for other council members, an advocate for the town's unique history, and a mentor for many who now lead the way in our community.
Jessica Abrams joined the Truckee Town Council in 2016 and served 4 years while also being a single mother to 2 young children and working full-time. She acknowledged that oftentimes we get a very similar population serving in positions of power in politics, and her service allowed her to be a role model for other women, for parents, for people who work full-time, and anyone else who may be inspired to make a difference in their community. Ms. Abrams served on the council during the significant changes and challenges, including the initial wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our council needed to make decisions to keep our community safe and supported, and a tremendous amount of work went into collaborating with regional partners and elected counterparts. She was a liaison for our League of California Cities and worked closely with Truckee Chamber of Commerce. She was part of important community discussions and decisions around the short-term rental and noise ordinance and the permitting of commercial cannabis, both of which have been divisive issues that required voices on the dais to represent and hear different concerns for the wider community.
3 of the 5 seats on our current Truckee Town Council are held by women: former Mayor Anna Klövstad, Vice Mayor Lindsay Romack, and Mayor Courtney Henderson. Our current mayor and vice mayor joined the Town Council in 2021, while Councilmember Klövstad was elected in 2018. Councilmember Klövstad has been a strong activist for our environment on the dais and in her volunteer efforts for Truckee Litter Corps and the Climate Transformation Alliance. She has been passionate in her advocacy during the Truckee 2040 General Plan Update process, including the development of 2 climate plans, a Climate Action Plan and a Climate Adaptation Plan. The Climate Action Plan is currently in its final draft stages and addresses how we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, while the Climate Adaptation Plan was finalized in July 2020 and addresses how we adapt to a climate that is already changing. Both will be included in the final adoption of the General Plan update. The United Nations theme for 2022's International Women's Day is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, recognizing the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the charge on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and response to build a more sustainable future for all. Mayor Henderson, Vice Mayor Romack, and Councilmember Klövstad have organized the Truckee Town Council goals into 5 important priorities for 2021 to 2023. Of those priorities, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and becoming a leader in environmental sustainability shows their commitment to building a sustainable community for our future. All of the women that have served and continue to serve our community have done so with courage. Courage to be seen, courage to be heard, courage to have difficult conversations, to advocate for what they believe in, to be challenged, to be criticized, and to stand back up after every battle and continue to lead. We hope that they inspire the young women and girls in our community to have courage, to stand up for what they believe in, to follow their passions, and know that they too can someday lead the way and make the world a better place. As Michelle Obama has said, history has shown that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own.
Bron, thank you so much. That was amazing. I loved the compilation, and as I was sitting here kind of reflecting back, I was saying to myself, wow, we really stand on pillars of female strength, fortitude, and leadership in this community. Thank you so much for helping us to celebrate some of those leaders. We have so many female leaders here in Truckee, from those who head our nonprofits, our businesses, our town staff, our youth who are stepping up every day to make their voices heard. I just want to say, embrace the female leaders in your lives, lift them up, support them. I don't think any of us can do this without our tribe and without unwavering support from our friends, our family, our colleagues. In supporting the female leaders around you, you're also lifting up our entire community. So thank you to everyone for the support as well. Okay. With that, we'll move on to 5.3. Ron, thank you again so much. And Danielle, I believe you are going to be introducing our new chief building official, Michael.
I am, thank you.
Thank you.
And I did ask Mike to provide me a background to talk about tonight, and so he wrote it as a brief background that was half a page long. But I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm actually going to ad-lib it. And I think part of that is because he really wanted to impress the community that he comes with a really extensive background in construction. It's also interesting to note that he started off in a small community, smaller than Truckee, in a town called Feather Falls outside of Oroville. And then he also lived in Reno before venturing down to Southern California for the majority of his professional career. But for our building community who really values being in the trades, that is Mike. He has been in the trades. He has done framing. He was a contractor. He has worked for third-party plan review companies. He's been a building official in both a capacity for the city of Redondo Beach, but also for the third-party companies that he worked for in many jurisdictions. So he comes to us with an extensive background in construction, in management, in expertise with other jurisdictions, which will be hugely helpful for us. But I think more than that, he comes with a passion for small mountain town communities, and specifically Truckee. He's bringing his fishing boat. He is ready to get it in the water once the snow melts. He loves the snow. He's excited to hit the ground running, which he's already done, and is really interested in working directly with our community, including our builders. So for any of the builders that are out there listening, or our building community in general, Mike is available. He's here. He's interested in meeting you all and seeing you out in the field. And I think this is a great match for Truckee.
Mike, thank you so much. We're so lucky to have you. We're so excited that you're here. I know Danielle is very excited. I think the whole building department is. So thank you so much for being here with us and investing in us as well.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe we have a couple more introductions. Riley, are you going to make some introductions for us this evening as well?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to introduce two brand new members of our Public Works road crew maintenance team. We have today Raul Santana and Grant Gray. A few things about Raul. He grew up in Portola, California. He spent the last 5 years working for the Tahoe Donner Forestry Department as a defensible space crew leader. He was actually hired by our Public Works Department last summer as a seasonal maintenance worker 1. And he was extremely enthusiastic about the opportunity to work for the town and wanted to know how to become a full-time maintenance worker 2 with the Public Works Department. We gave Raul a list of things he could do to put him in the running for the full-time position, including making sure the coffee was ready to go in the morning for the crew, the boss's truck was cleaned and waxed, but most importantly, that he got his commercial driver's license and all the necessary endorsements. Raul that summer took the initiative and learned from his coworkers and got the necessary commercial driver's license. We're happy to have promoted him from the seasonal maintenance worker to a full-time regular maintenance, to our full-time regular maintenance staff. So when Raul's not working, providing great service to the town of Truckee, he spends his time playing ball with his 9-year-old son. Thank you, Raul. And our second new team member here is Grant Gray. Grant grew up in Tahoma, California, with just the west shore of Lake Tahoe over there, which is funny because I used to live in Tahoma. Grant spent the last 18 years working for Kelly Erosion Control, doing erosion control and revegetation projects across California and Nevada, which is funny because I used to work for Kelly Erosion Control. I feel like someone's following me. Grant enjoys riding snowboards in the winter, everything the outdoors have to offer, and I just learned he's got a family of 6. He's got 2 older, 2 older children, and then has more recently adopted 2 children from Washoe County, two sisters. Yep. So both Grant and Raul had minimal snow removal experience when they got here, but after plowing an entire season's worth of snow in 3 weeks in December under extreme conditions, they're well on their way to veteran status. So Raul and Grant, welcome to the Truckee team.
Thank you.
Raul, Grant, welcome. We are lucky to have you as well. Thank you so much for your service to our community. Okay, moving right along. 5.4, Jen, you're going to present our Employee Incentive Awards.
I am. Thank you so much and good evening. This is the best part of the job. So we have quarterly meetings with all of our employees each quarter. And at those meetings, the department head team, the leadership team here, as well as any staff member can recommend incentive awards. And those awards are given based on our town values. So we had an emphasis on teamwork this past quarter. I'm going to read to the recipients of the incentive awards and acknowledge who nominated them. First, we had from our entire clerks division, Sarah Ring, Elizabeth Elizabeth, Caitlin Brennan, for commitment, excellence, and teamwork. Judy nominated her team, and this is what she had to say. I'd like to recommend incentive awards for the clerk staff. During the cyber incident, they published council meeting agendas, helped create templates for documents, and process contracts from a whiteboard, literally an old whiteboard, with limited resources. They responded to 100 public records requests submitted during the cyber incident, in addition to processing over 100 contracts or contract amendments. Within a few short weeks of Elizabeth's first day of work, the town recovered our Laserfish records lost during the cyber incident. Elizabeth had to get up to speed on the processing for responding to public records requests, including the cumbersome process of requesting building plans, which are the majority of the requests. Elizabeth and Sarah worked literally day and night with the support of Caitlin to respond to the requests, as we all learned the differences between Laserfish on-premise and online. They did a great job accomplishing all of this in record time, and by the first week in December, all the requests had received an initial response. We also have Lynn from our clerks department. Lynn was nominated by Judy as well for commitment, excellence, and teamwork. And this is centered around the Veterans Day holiday and ceremony that the town supports. So the Clerks Department is responsible for putting on the annual Veterans Day ceremony. Lynn was instrumental in the town receiving national recognition as an official Veterans Day event, worked on the public outreach and planning for the event, and then at the last minute, Lynn had to take over the Veterans Day event. Lynn managed to take point on the day of logistics, and if you didn't get to see it in person, it's recorded at Truckee Tahoe Media. And Lynn, with the support of Sarah, set up, supported, and broke down the event that went very well. All of these efforts showed commitment to our community, teamwork to accomplish goals, and excellence. Next, we had Scott Mathett in our engineering department. He was nominated by Nicole Casey for accountability, teamwork, and excellence. For anybody that doesn't know, the town has a very robust wellness program, and Scott has been instrumental in participating on the Balanced Employee Safety Team, otherwise known as our BEST Committee, which is a voluntary team tasked with helping the town devise wellness solutions for its employees. As part of this team, Scott heard the call from our fellow employees in Public Works that they felt their remote-ish location preventing them from fully utilizing our wellness program. One idea that Public Works felt would be effective in their wellness was an on-site gym at the Public Works location, similar to the one at the town location. After hearing the call, Scott never gave up finding some way to meet the needs of the Public Works team. Some wellness grant funds surfaced via the town's insurance company, and utilizing these funds, Scott designed a small gym for the Public Works crew. It took some creative problem solving to find a space at Public Works, but Scott did not give up and scheduled a meeting with the management team to help them locate a space. This represents the town values of teamwork, commitment, and excellence, because Scott took his duty of representing all town employees seriously, but hearing Public Works needs and going above and beyond to find a solution. Next, we recognized our entire Public Works team, our facilities crew and our streets crew, and our mechanics. for the winter storm event response. So from December 22nd through January 9th, all the public works personnel worked an average of 140 hours per week in order to keep up with the Truckee roads open for the Truckee residents and visitors. This included the Christmas and New Year's holiday that they got to spend with their coworkers instead of their families. Tahoe Donner and the west end of Donner Lake received 12 feet of snow from Christmas Eve through New Year's. There was an unprecedented number of vehicles abandoned in the roadways, which crews had to work around. There were also hundreds of phone calls from residents who were suggesting their street be plowed before their neighbors. And during the entire time, the public works staff banded together to get the roads cleared with a positive, can-do attitude. This exemplified the town's values of accountability, excellence, and teamwork. Next, we recognized our STR team. That consisted of Rosie, Angie, Christine, Isaac, Laura, and Hillary. So since October, an interdepartmental short-term rental project team has been working tirelessly to review and update the short-term rental program. This high-profile project has required significant data collection, research on other communities, public outreach, and convening a stakeholder advisory committee, a consideration of complex information, and a range of perspectives. The team brought the final study and recommendations to the Town Council in February, and we're on track to bring back an updated ordinance to the Town Council later this month. Throughout this process, our team members, Rosie, Angie, Christine, Isaac, Laura, and Hillary, have exemplified the value of teamwork and commitment. Each team member shared their unique experience and expertise managing our STR program and worked seamlessly to inform the overall direction of this project. And then our last recipients are from our PD department. We had our Officer of the Year, David McKay, who was recognized for his excellence. He was voted by his fellow officers for his professionalism, trusted judgment, and excellence in multiple collateral assignments, an absolute commitment to being a team player with no task being handed down to him without full dedication and efficiency. Brittany Johansson for commitment. Brittany was nominated the Employee of the Year at the Police Department by many of her fellow staff members and teammates for her communication skills, work quality, attention to detail, strong problem-solving skills, and willingness to assist in any situation. Her helpful reputation and friendly, positive attitude is an asset to our whole organization and has been pivotal in managing the challenges of 2021. And then lastly, for the value of teamwork, Stephen Kilgore, who is a member of our animal services team. In the past year, with all the changes and transitions that have come with COVID, the cyber attack, and staffing shortages, Stephen stepped up to help maintain a consistent level of service in animal services. He has taken on new projects and new tasks as part of the Animal Caretaker 2 responsibilities. He comes to work every day with a positive attitude and treats everyone in a polite and respectful manner, including challenging and disgruntled members of the public. During an event at the shelter, he maintained his poise and calm demeanor during an extremely stressful and traumatic event at the shelter. He followed all protocols and was able to ensure the safety of his coworkers. We had a lot of recognition this past quarter, but a lot of great work and a lot of great teamwork. So thank you to all the staff.
Thank you so much. I think a big round of applause for everyone mentioned there. Thank you, Jen. I also love to hear those because we don't necessarily get the day-to-day interactions with all of staff, so it's really, really nice for us to hear all of the work that's also happening behind the scenes and for the public. Thank you so much for that. Okay. 5.5. Sarah, you're going to present a REACH code update, which I'm excited about because, of course, we had a pretty robust conversation about REACH codes on our January 25th meeting, I believe it was. So Sarah, take it away.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Sherburne. I'm the Sustainability Program Analyst, and I'll be giving a brief informational overview about what a REACH code is and then a process update on where we're at. REACH codes are aptly named. Basically, their intent is to reach beyond the state energy code. And so that means creating a local amendment to the California Energy Code, which is Title 24, Part 6, which is more stringent than the state code. And there are certain requirements for the code to gain approval from the California Energy Commission. And those requirements are that it increase building energy efficiency, that it be cost effective, and I'll go into this a little bit more in the next slide, that it pass through the standard town council ordinance adoption process, that it gain the CEC approval, and then that it be filed with the California Building Standards Commission. A little bit on cost effectiveness. So there's a state REACH codes program that assists local governments in doing things like these cost effectiveness analyses, and they provide a lot of free resources. So this is a snapshot from their cost effectiveness analysis in 2019 for Truckee specifically. So this is utilizing Truckee's utility rates and taking into account our climate and climate zone 16. So they perform calculations on annual bill savings and emission savings and that sort of thing for specific measures that increase energy efficiency in homes to help jurisdictions develop these REACH codes in a cost-effective manner. And these are some of the processes that we'll be undergoing as we move forward in our REACH code consideration. When we first discussed REACH codes, there was a lot of public concern about what this would mean. I think people's minds immediately jumped to electrification, but there is a really wide range of REACH codes and a wide scope in how they are applied. So the most common kind is directly related to building energy efficiency, and that's typically for new construction, but it can also apply to remodels or alterations, and those are improvements that simply enhance the building energy efficiency, and that can be done in a number of ways. Then there are REACH codes that enhance electric readiness of buildings, so through electric pre-wiring or panel upgrades, or EV readiness and EV charging. A few codes deal with benchmarking, so that may be requiring energy audits at the point of sale and then disclosing that information to someone who's buying a home. And then a few deal with water efficiency, but the most common by far is, again, building energy efficiency, and that's largely what we'll be looking into. And then there are a couple of different approaches within those categories. So some jurisdictions take a prescriptive approach, and that means requiring one or more specific energy efficiency or renewable energy measures. For example, requiring solar panels on certain new buildings or cool roofs on certain buildings. This is a less flexible approach, but is simpler to enforce. And then on the other side, many codes are performance-based. So that means that buildings are required to perform more efficiently than the state code, but there's substantial flexibility or a varying amount of flexibility in project design. An example could be requiring buildings to exceed the minimum building energy performance by 15%, and to achieve this sort of compliance, the applicant could choose from a suite of various energy efficiency measures like attic insulation, duct sealing, heat pump installation, etc., to comply with that requirement. These codes may also have different standards for buildings that are using mixed fuel, so that's natural gas and propane and electricity, versus those that use only electricity. So an all-electric building wouldn't necessarily have to meet the same performance standard that a mixed fuel would. And again, jurisdictions apply these REACH codes to residential, they apply them to commercial, they apply them to both. So just to emphasize that there are many different routes that these codes take, many different scopes that they take, and we'll really be exploring what is going to fit best for Truckee. To update on our process, a committee has reviewed the proposals that we received in response to our request for proposals. We are performing candidate interviews next week, and we'll be making a selection shortly thereafter. And then hopefully we'll be kicking off the process really soon, and that'll involve starting a robust stakeholder engagement process, community engagement process, working with the expertise of the consultant to really consider if a REACH code is going to make sense for Truckee, and if so, what sort of code is going to best serve our community. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I realize I haven't asked if there are any council questions about any of the presentations. Does anyone have one about this one or any of the ones that we've had? I apologize for that. Go ahead.
I was going to tell a funny story about the snow removal guys who didn't know where they were doing snow, but they already left, so I'll skip that one, and we'll move on to the next one. My only question on this one is, I see a lot of regulatory language in here, and I'm just wondering if like job training, contractor availability, those types of things are part of this process, and if that all kind of gets lumped together, so we adopt or whatever ends up happening with REACH goes, but there's also sort of a job training and other aspect, because that's great. We can put as much regulation into effect as we want, but if we can't actually do it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the firms that we are interviewing, they will be providing services to help us implement the code largely from a staff standpoint, so helping train our building officials and things like that to make sure that they know how to do everything. The other side of the piece that you mentioned with contractor training, workforce development, is something that we're developing in tandem and kind of separately from this specific REACH code process, but is something that we're really conscious of and are looking into, state resources and other ways that we can help develop the workforce here, work with the Contractors Association. They have some good resources, educational resources and webinars and that sort of thing. So we are conscious of developing that at the same time, but it's not specifically part of the REACH code consultant's duty.
Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm. And just so you know, I have been working with the Contractors Association and talking with them at length about this issue. And just recently, they have a heat pump training happening in congruence with a couple of different organizations. And I'm hoping to get more of those types of things happening, particularly with the heat pump technology. We know we need to provide a lot more training and create a lot more opportunities for expansion into that service sector, but there'll be others as well, other opportunities that we'll work with them on.
Any other questions? Okay. Jen, back to you for 5.6 for our town manager report.
I have no additional comments this evening. We've had a lot of presentations, but happy Women's History Month to everybody, and we look forward to the discussion tonight, particularly around our e-bike and our BMR program.
Thank you. I think we're all looking forward to that. So really quickly, I will open public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment related to any of the presentations this evening? If you do, you can step right up to the podium. Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment and move on to our consent calendar. We only have one item on consent tonight, item 6.1, Transit Planning Services Contract with LSC Transportation Consultants. Is there any member of council who'd like to pull this item from consent tonight? Any member from staff? And any member from the public who would like to pull this item? Okay. Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent calendar, please?
I'll make a motion to approve consent calendar.
And I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And consent passes unanimously. So with that, we will move on to our first discussion item of the evening, our Town of Truckee Electric Bike Share Program update and authorization to proceed with applicable permits and development code updates. And as always, we will start with our presentation. Alfred, thank you for being here for tonight. And then we'll move right into council questions. And when we get to council questions, I will turn to Vice Mayor Romack to kick us off. Alfred, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor, members of Town Council, Alfred Knotts. Before you discuss the e-bike program, give you an update and then kind of next steps on what we need to do. We're kind of working through some details of, what does this mean? How does it operate in the town? Where do the stations go? We had a preliminary map in the RFP, and now we are actually drilling down with the actual vendor also, and we'll give an update on that also. That's an important item of note as well. So. Again, the purpose of the agenda item is to give an update on the selection, the installation process, and the permit. The RFP process. So we started this off back in November. It wasn't long after I started. So back in November and issued the RFP. We had a very good kind of interest in the process and in our program. I think that's reflective of the town, a lot of our sustainability measures and initiatives also, and just the overall focus on alternative transportation versus trying to build our way out of congestion. So I think that's reflective of the interest of the proposals we saw. So we saw 8 proposals. As we worked through the RFP, we kept it kind of open in terms of what the technology would look like. We didn't want to preclude what the dockless versus dock stations. Kind of get an idea of what vendors are out there for, scooters, also e-bikes, and kind of see what the technology was. So we got 5 submittals from dockless stations, 2 from docking stations, and 1 was non-responsive, or they technically were really an analytical firm. They didn't really provide the services. They would look at your data and things like that, which most of the firms do with their own data. We had an evaluation committee we set up. And we went through a process, and we, as part of that evaluation committee process, we did do an interview panel also, which was a smaller handful, and that's articulated in the staff report also. But we did arrive at a unanimous decision on what the technology meaning dockless versus docking. And we went through some of those pros and cons as the committee, settled on a docking station model, and B-Cycle as our vendor. And I'll talk to you about them a little bit in a moment as well. And we do have a representative on here. Just full disclosure on the call-in virtual meeting from B-Cycle also. And we'll give Oliver an opportunity to kind of introduce himself at the end. So again, they're highly reputable program. We did do a lot of research and check references and things like that, and looked at the applicability of the technology and their stations. They have operated systems all across the country. The map down there at the bottom is where their stations and their municipalities are operating. They've operated in ski towns too, and in harsh climates. They have a station or a program up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, also supported by their transit program, START, which is Southern Teton Area Rapid Transit. They also operate systems in Boulder and all throughout California, and a few places in California, not throughout, but also in areas within winter seasons up in Wisconsin and things like that as well in those locations. So again, check their references, came back very, very favorable, and that was something we shared with the committee also as part of our process. So kind of going to their operating model, this was in their proposal, and one of the things within their operating model, and again, these aren't all set in stone right now, but this did come verbatim out of the proposal. There is no capital costs or operating costs or subsidy required from the town. So obviously that was very attractive to us also. But their model is, they are owned by Trek Bicycles, which is also very attractive as well, meaning the technology, also just their culture of Trek bikes also. The fact that they do have a pretty substantial backing as well from their parent company. They did provide a fee structure, and I don't want to drill down on this too much because this isn't set in stone, but we talked about what we present tonight here and getting the overall operating model. And this will play into how we arrive at some of the stations as well, and some of the sponsorships and things that branding and things that might come forward that have yet to be determined. And in relation to that pricing structure, there was a heavy emphasis placed in the RFP that we wrote to put emphasis on equity and accessibility to make sure that this is an equitable program in terms of access, geographic access, access to be able to check out the bikes. Not everybody has a smartphone, so is there opportunities to do that? They've established a lot of these programs in different communities, and that was very attractive also. So they have a lot of proven models, proven technology, and again, proven systems that have been around in communities for really the long haul. That's the other thing, is a lot of these companies have been out and kind of crashed and burned at a certain time with venture capital money, and B-Cycle has weathered the markets and also through their technology as well. So getting down to tonight, what we wanted to focus on, now that we've kind of procured or identified the vendor, and are getting into the siting locations of the docking stations, we came across different aspects of where these locations will be. Some of them will be on the right-of-way. Some of these will be on private property. Some of these will be in quasi-governmental agencies, such as the rec district, maybe the school district, things like that. But those require different mechanisms, how we can permit these, what kind of mechanism do we have, since there's not a financial contribution or a contractual obligation under a finance transaction, what do we enter into? And so that's what we kind of batted this around and arrived at. The town will have certain agreements in place, but private property owners will have different agreements in place. And then those public agency facilities or public facility zoning areas will also have different agreements and different processes also. So that's what we want to kind of walk through here tonight. So again, looking at those stations that we identified, we walked through what they would look like. We also want to make sure that we have a broad network, good coverage, and things like that. So the phased implementation that we're looking at tonight, we're presenting, is that there will be a phase one, and what we want to focus on, and we walk through with the B-Cycle folks, and they can speak to this a little bit, but obviously areas that are within our town control, within our right-of-way, are consistent with our permitting process or an agreement process, that we would enter in directly with them in some type of an agreement. And that would be our first phase of the process. Again, looking at this summer, that was heavily articulated or stressed in the RFP that, launch for this summer is our goal, and that is still our goal. And that is our objective in terms of our schedule. We've identified approximately 18 of those stations. For the public agency facilities, we've identified approximately 17 of those stations. So again, that would be kind of the rec district. So kind of West End Beach, an example. Also the PUD, the rec center themselves, regional park, and places like that. Kind of the same schedule. Might take a little bit more time because that would be another party to those agreements, something that's a little bit out of our control, but we would definitely help facilitate. And then that third phase would be a private commercial property, and that's something we wanted to get direction on tonight, or approval, is moving forward with some development code amendments and changes to the land use table, and we've talked to planning about that, and that's something we would have to do because it's not right now identified as a use within our land use tables in the development code. Here's kind of a layout here. Again, this is kind of a broad brush. We identified some preliminary locations within the RFP. We've sat down with the B-Cycle folks and, taking a harder look. The next step is for them to come out and physically boots on the ground and look. The thing about the program and their technology is very scalable. It's not hardwired either, so it can range from 1 to up to, 15, 20 bikes if we want to. They're lithium-ion battery charged, so there's no higher wiring, there's no solar power or anything like that. So having done this before through one program and now going through this again, the technology has evolved to the point where this is, I can say it's an apples and oranges comparison. I mean, the scalability, the ability to, we don't have to pour pads like I've had to do before, and saw cut and trench and things like that. So this technology and their model is very, very attractive and very suitable to our environment also. So the green is identified as kind of those phase one, and the orange is identified as those phase 3, and the purple is the phase 2. So the purple is the kind of the quasi, is the public agency. The green is the town-controlled or right-of-way kind of locations, and the latter, the orange, is the private locations. And again, these are a map that we've identified and walked through of a variety of different screening criteria, and then the B-Cycle folks will be out in the next week for us to kind of boots on the ground. So that's, I guess, one positive of our winter right now is we can get a little jump on a few things out there in terms of a field visit. So how do we measure success? We're, even though there's not technically right now any type of financial investment, we want to make sure that this program is very successful for both parties. We've had those very, very partnership-oriented discussions with B-Cycle. How do we make sure that this is a contributing system and a contributing asset to our community and meets a lot of our objectives we talked about with sustainability, access, mobility, and just overall equity in our transportation system also. So some of the data and some of those points and reporting requirements that will be built into an agreement, whatever agreement that looks like, is system utilization, and this is in the proposal too, that we report back on, how many rides are we getting, how many stations, what are the utilization of each station, trip length and duration. We can calculate VMT from that also, and get an idea about what our GHG reductions are. Time of day usage, this helps with the rebalancing effort. So they typically go through about a 3 to 4 month period, and they can see kind of obviously trends and where bikes are going, where they're being left, where they need to be redistributed and things like that. So kind of a business analytical tool. Looking at our rider characteristics, who's riding the bikes, what are the purposes, are these visitors, are these residents, are these commuters, and those will require some type of a survey, but not something that's super intensive. And again, making sure we're giving a good customer experience, make sure it's safe, that we are dealing with complaints and service calls, we're not straining people, and responsive to kind of the clutter abatement and things like that we're making sure the bikes are available on a daily basis, honestly. And this is a little snapshot in the corner of one of the dashboard tools that we had in Park City for our program, and something that we would look forward to have something similar as well, to be front-facing to the public. Next steps is we would conduct this site visit over the next week or two with the B-Cycle folks, finalize those locations. Again, looking at those phase 1 locations, which are the town-controlled property and town-owned right-of-way, owned and operated. Initiate marketing and outreach, working with the vendor of B-Cycle. Work with them to facilitate agreements between those other entities that the town technically will not be party to, but help facilitate that. And then look at that installation as well in phase 2 during this summer launch period, and work with those private owners. We work through the development code amendment and things that we need to do on our regulatory side to make sure that we're in compliance and can facilitate that side of things in terms of the private sector installation. And honestly, with that time frame and the number of stations we have in those other 2 phases, the phase 3 and the private property locations will most likely would be a next summer type of installation. So, and we do have Oliver on here from B-Cycle, and I would leave it up to the mayor if you want him to chime in now, or however you'd like to handle his participation.
Sure. Oliver, do you have anything that you wanted to add to the presentation? Otherwise, we can move right into council questions, and they might have some questions for you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor, Town Council, and especially Alfred. Alfred's been a wonderful partner for us, so we really appreciate the work that he's done. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now with B-Cycle, and I'll say the preparedness that Alfred and his team had coming into this, and already knowing where we want to, kind of the direction that we want to go. I've not seen it at this level before, so I really appreciate the work that he's put into this so far. I would just echo what Alfred said, is that we're really excited to come out there to start looking at the specific sites. That's I would say it's the major hurdle, is finding locations that work not only for you all, but that work well for riders and ongoing operations as well. I also have plans to meet with an operational partner. So the way this program works is we're going to enter into contract with somebody locally that can run operations for us. So there's a positive economic impact on the town of Truckee as well. In addition to that, we're looking at somebody locally to kind of facilitate our branding on the bikes and potential sponsorship. So those are all, it's a lot of work to be done. Like Alfred said, I plan to be out there next week and it'll be my first visit out there, but really excited to get this project going.
Oliver, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Alfred, again, thank you. I think we're all really excited for this one. We've been talking about it for a little bit, and I know there's a lot of community enthusiasm for it as well. So with that, let's turn to council questions, and Vice Mayor Romack, I'll turn to you first.
Thank you. Thank you, Alfred and Oliver, for speaking to the staffing of the service, because that was a question I had, just ensuring there is staffing on the ground, paying attention to where bikes are and how everything's working. I did want to ask, and Alfred, I don't know if this is for you or Oliver, just how does the proposed user fees compare to other services in other areas? I'm just kind of curious, I haven't traveled in a long time because of COVID. So are those user fees kind of standard to what other folks are seeing in areas if they're to visit and, participate in a rental e-bike program?
Yeah, I can speak to that. From our previous program, it's very much in alignment. The idea is for locals, if you look at the pricing structure, is to be, can you see that? Where is it? Okay. For the pass program to be very attractive also. And where visitors might, not have the pass. The thing about Tahoe is that we do have a lot of the same visitors that come back up, second homeowners. I think it would still be attractive. So that is the kind of the goal there, is to find that price point for both the daily user, the resident, and the commuter and the visitor and themselves. So it's very much in line with what I've seen. And I think we'll work through those details. But yeah, it's been very much in alignment. And Dan and I we weren't joking about the price of gas, but it's definitely, it could help it be more attractive, honestly. So make it more viable and more attractive on a daily basis. So it is in line with that.
Thank you. Another question is about phasing. So it sounded like, phase one would be on town property, phase two, other governmental agencies, which could be this summer, is what you were saying? Okay.
Yes.
Because definitely seeing the west end of Donner as one of the options, the sooner we can get that for summer, I think would be great. So making sure we don't wait until next year to get that one in, because I could see a lot of people wanting to ride their bikes along the lake. And then another question is just how often do we have access to the data? You mentioned there will be a dashboard, a public-facing dashboard, but I'm guessing there might be some additional stuff that maybe isn't available to the public. Will town staff be able to view that on a regular basis, so that way if we need to make changes or adjustments, we'd have the opportunity to talk with B-Cycle?
Yeah, and that's something we would work out with them, but I know that information from my previous experience also has been readily available. It's even evolved since that time. There's a similar thing that general transit feed that we have with our bus transit that you see on your app. Bike share programs have a general bike share feed now also, and that was put in our specifications and RFP also, and they do have that type of technology, and something the Commissioner, Ruth Miller, also is very familiar with and made sure that it was part of that submittal as well. So that data is real time. It is kind of weeding through it, but it can be available to us upon request typically.
Excellent. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pallavi?
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick question, Alfred. When you went to your heat map of the docking stations there, it looks like there's clearly a huge concentration in the old Brockway Road to downtown corridor, both between phase one and phase three. And my question is, I think it's awesome that we're going with the lithium-ion or whatever battery system that isn't have to tie into the grid. So nice job there, first and foremost. But second, does that also mean that these docking stations are somewhat, I don't want to say mobile in the sense that they're obviously going to, pick up and move, but relocatable in a fairly easy way? Because it seems like we might just have a lot of overlap, obviously, here, specifically on that corridor.
Yeah, and that's what Oliver's going to come out and take a look at, is we've identified not each and every one of these, but where the opportunity would exist. And then the thing about the scalability is that some of these locations may have one or two bikes, and some of them may have 5 or 7 or even 10. So in terms of the kind of the infrastructure themselves, it is very easy to move these things. I'm very impressed by how they can bolt these things down and put them down. And they're, I wouldn't say they're resistant to vandalism by any means. If somebody wants to break something, they can break something. But they are pretty sturdy also. But they are easy to put in, pull out, but also pretty tried and true tested as well. So they can be moved around. And something we talked about with snow removal, and that needs to be the case too.
So will the bikes have to go back to another dock, or can they be left ad hoc anywhere and then they get redistributed, or do they have to go from dock to dock?
They would go back to another dock.
They do have to go dock to dock. So it's like on the Big Island, I think that's where I've seen it, and the pricing was actually identical as the pricing that I saw here. Only other quick question is, I do like that that one bike example versus 10 bikes. I think regional park, right? 10, 20 bikes. One concern I have, and just help allay it, is we're not going to be impeding sort of pedestrian corridors, for example, sidewalk, right-of-ways, things like that. I am sensitive to the congestion, as you will, between trees and benches and trash cans and now bike docking stations, right? So just making sure that we're super conscious of that and not impeding pedestrian travel. But I'm sure you guys have thought of that.
Yeah, that was something. Yeah, it was a very, very thorough discussion, and we even moved a few things out and deleted some that we felt were going to be an obstruction or even just create more clutter. Like front of Bar of America, it seemed like a good location from Google Earth from Oliver's. And we were like, no, it's not gonna. You have kids running in the street, tripping over these things. But yes,
little pocket park back there though would be perfect.
Yes.
I'm sure MAP would love to help create a solar structure as part of a little trade there to get some docking stations in that area. That'd be a perfect one. Side comment. My apologies. Last question is simply back to that heat map thing. Those are more opportunity sites. Those are not, especially in phase one, we're not necessarily committing to 18 docking stations right off the bat. We're sort of, those are under consideration once we get some on the ground true thing.
Correct, and that's what Oliver will come out and take a look at and say this isn't going to work. Even the ADA access obviously is a big concern for everybody involved as well, and we'll take a look at all that as well.
And I do have one more, sorry. The only reason we're not going with a season pass or an annual pass as part of that pricing structure is because we haven't committed to doing it for a whole year type of thing. We're starting just summer, or are we starting year round?
So the way I had written the RFP, it's probably reflective of the way I wrote the RFP, is the fact that we would do a 9-month and we would demobilize or decommission some of the sites. They operate systems, like I said, in Madison, Wisconsin all year long, and think that it is viable here, and if we can find locations, so that would be reflective of an annual passive. So they were more responding to my restrictions in the RFP.
Copy that. Thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Klofstad, do you have questions?
I do. My fellow council members caught a couple of them, so that's great. I'm really curious about the launch. How does that happen, and how quickly do you think we'll start seeing the first of it, because of how that's going to need to overlap and interface with public outreach and education about the system?
That's a good question, and something we're still kind of working through the details. I think it'll be more there'll be more specifics on that when we get the locations all nailed down, so we know when the network is. The way that I did this before is we installed all the stations. We didn't put bikes out yet until the network was kind of there and everything was there, so that we weren't just kind of come rent a bike and leave you out in the middle of Kimball Junction or whatever in Park City. But we would make sure the network is established, and then make sure people are aware of what that network is, available, or knowledge of the app also. As Oliver mentioned, they're working with a branding and outreach kind of consortium in town also. And so I think there's just a lot of that kind of slow build, I guess, too, but we don't want to over-promise and under-deliver is my management, or what I wanted to manage. So there will be a lot of steps in doing that, but making sure that the infrastructure is there. And kind of a safety net, honestly, too, to make sure that the boots on the ground person is very familiar with the town and the operation, and they are working with the local shop to have that. So there'll be a lot of those steps in place just to make sure that everybody's very coordinated, and this is launched in a strategic manner.
A lot of preloading.
Yes.
I could imagine somebody, one of the stations that I suspect will be easy to get will be Donner State Park, and then somebody's going to want to ride that up around Northwoods, and what happens if they run out of battery? And, it's stranded, and I mean, all of that sort of stuff. It seems like there's a lot of education that's going to have to come with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
There will be.
And there will be a partnership. Is it a local bike shop or a nonprofit or an individual? How?
I'm not privy to the conversations they're having right now, but it identified, generally speaking in the RFP that a bike shop would be, and nonprofits were also encouraged, but we didn't, explicitly, specify what they would have to work with.
Well, I'm excited about this for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I'm hopeful that it can alleviate some of our impacted parking areas. And so I guess that's what do you need in order to focus on those areas first and help facilitate, alleviating some of those known impacted areas? Is that where will you be able to focus on those?
Yes, and that's where we looked at these kind of activity centers, is where people can, back to the question about leaving a bike where you get it, is that they can, dock the bike in an easy manner, recheck the bike out so they're not being charged, and make that return trip, but would focus on areas that are limited in parking where we don't want to provide more parking, that this would be an alternative to providing that parking. And something we talked about through that development code discussion too, is this something that could potentially be a mitigation measure or something like that down the road, but something I can't speak to, but something we talked about in terms of long-range planning, I guess.
But we should know sometime in the next 6 months, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie.
Yes, I think these are mostly for Oliver, but maybe Alfred can back you up, Oliver. Oliver, do you know how we'll be able to separate the number of bicycle trips that are taken in place of automotive travel and how many are simply taken in place of, let's say, walking or jogging or some other non-automotive activity?
Yeah, there actually is there's a standard. It's usually provided by NABSA, which is the National American Bike Association. So they provide us some data about how often a bike trip using bike share is replaced with an automobile trip. So we actually use that in our own system to not only calculate exactly what you're talking about, but to calculate our carbon offset. So that's something that we track as well, as people ride longer and more often, we're tracking specifically for Truckee the carbon offset. But it's an estimated value. It's not obviously it's not going to be the exact value.
Okay. Then I have two more questions. Based on your experience, do you have any sense of how much of the e-bike usage will be due to commuting and how much of it will be recreational?
So we usually distinguish that by pass types. We've just found that and we also do post-ride surveys. So we try to gather that information two different ways. By pass type, it's usually if somebody's checking out a bike we call it a single ride, which means they're paying for just that one ride. Once they return a trip, their membership is essentially over. And then we also have, I think it was included on one of those slides, but like a monthly pass or an annual pass, if we decided to introduce that here, so we gather data that way, and we know how often people are riding and who are we call them kind of super users who's consistently using the program. But then we also do post-ride surveys and gather a lot of feedback from riders, and kind of what the purpose and intent of their ride was.
Do you have any tentative expectation of what percentage of riders will be visitors versus residents, or recreational versus commuters?
Oh, that's a good question. I personally don't have an expectation, and that is not because it's mainly because I'm not going to pretend to know your town better than you all do. Just in general, I think we usually see in certain parts of or some of the systems that we own and operate in, it tends to be close to 50-50 is long-term members versus just tourism rides. I'm not, that's data. Alfred may know a little bit better of what they kind of want to gear towards, but another part of that is where are we going to put these stations? So putting them where I think we want to have a good mix. It makes for a sustainable program, but and that was an intent that Alfred and I took while we were looking for station locations, is get a good mix of being able to give access to residential areas, but also put stations where people want to ride to and where we think they're going to go to.
Okay, thank you. Alfred, do you have anything to add?
I mean, having worked in TRPA and familiar with their travel demand model, the main trip purpose in Tahoe was to drive and see the lake. So, so recreation trips I think are still very valuable. We're still reducing a lot of VMT. We live in an area where people want to go access trailheads or go see the lake, or even the river. So I think, I think it would be on the higher end, honestly, recreational trip, because that's people come up here just to do. And if they're doing that without their automobile, I think that's a positive thing. So I think what Oliver mentions is something we can come up with estimates and try to calibrate those honestly through more user surveys in terms of their trip purpose. And a lot of times people are making multiple trip purposes sometimes on these trips, like they're going to lunch, then they're going sightseeing, whatever it may be. So I think we'll have to look at how we can extrapolate that data a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My fellow council members were very thorough in their questions, so I don't have any additionally. With that, we will open public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to make a public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we will close public comment for that this evening, and we'll move right into council deliberation. And Vice Mayor Romack, I will go back to you, please.
Thank you. And thank you again for all the info. This is very exciting. I know we've talked about this, and thank you, Alfred, for making it happen so quickly. I think it's also fantastic. This is a system where we're not asked to put funding into it. I know there's staff time, and that costs our town money, and development code updates, will cost time, but that is part of our work plan. So I'm excited to move forward, try this out. I did ask the question on data because I do hope, we're paying attention and, making changes. Councilmember Pallavi's question about moving stations. I could see, we envision it to be one way and it is way different than that. So just having the data to be able to change up the program to make it even more successful. So I'm excited to move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Pallavi.
Yeah, great job. Way to move rapidly. I support everything that Vice Mayor Romack said. I also support the proceeding with the development code updates, and I do think it's imperative. I think you sort of alluded to it, Alfred, and I would just want to encourage our planning staff, to look at if we are going to start putting some of this stuff on private property, look at how we can swap parking requirements, how we can even utilize existing parking spaces so that we're not creating new issues on some of those properties, and just be open to flexibility and creativity as we move that forward. So that's all.
Really great points. Thank you. Councilmember Klostad.
Councilmember Pallavi spoke my mind. So thank you. I'm in full support and would also fully support creativity and possibly using parking stalls in some of these areas.
Thank you. Councilmember Zabriskie.
I agree with the other council members. One concern I have is the risk of the attraction of this activity actually increasing parking demand because of people driving to a docking station in order to ride. overall, though, I see it being a net gain that we should be able to cut back on the need for parking through a successful program. I was on this committee. I want to commend Alfred and the other members. It was apparent everybody read the materials, the submissions, and came to our meeting. I think we just had 1 or 2 meetings.
Yeah, 2.
But came prepared with thoughtful discussions, and there was certainly some back and forth, and so it's really nice to see that given the back and forth, we ended up unanimously favoring the selected candidate, BC Cycle. I'm ready to vote.
Wonderful. Well, I'm hearing a lot of support. So would anyone like to make a motion?
I move that we authorize staff to enter into the agreement with BC Cycle to allow electric bike station installations in connection with their proposed program, and then direct staff to prepare updates to the Truckee Development Code to allow bike share stations on private property.
And I'll second.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are unanimous. Alfred, thank you again. Oliver, thank you for being here this evening. We really appreciate you.
Thank you all so much.
Okay, with that, moving right along to item 7.2, our below market rate housing program draft guidelines and request for proposals from a third-party housing program administrator. And Hillary, you're going to kick us off with a presentation, I believe.
I am. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. For our next item regarding the below market rate housing program, we're joined here tonight by our consultant team, Erin Nusain from BAE Urban Economics, who's here in person tonight. So thanks for joining us, Erin. And Matt Warner from Rise Housing Solutions, who's joining us via Zoom. So thank you, Matt, for joining us. We can see him as a small square up on the top of the screen. I'll start by providing some background on the process, and then Matt will share the draft program guidelines. First, what is the below market rate, or BMR, housing program concept? It's a program to purchase deed restrictions on existing or newly developed housing units. The deed restriction then places long-term conditions on the use of the property, including requiring full-time residency, prohibiting short-term rentals, and in most cases requiring owner occupancy. With that, the intent of this program is both as a housing preservation program, protecting homes through deed restrictions as workforce housing for the long term. And it's also intended as a housing affordability program because the deed restriction payment from the town can be used by the purchaser towards the down payment. And then once in place, a deed restriction essentially puts the home into a separate resale market for full-time residents that's less impacted by our vacation home rental market. Next, a reminder of where we are in this program development. Council considered this new program concept in July of 2021 and directed staff to begin working on the program. We then hired our consultant team to work with the town on developing the new program, including convening a program advisory committee. In December, your council received an update and provided feedback on the program development, and since that time, we've used that feedback to develop program guidelines, which we'll be presenting tonight. Following council's direction tonight, our goal is to stand up the program administration this spring and then launch the new program by this summer. I'd like to take a moment to thank our program advisory committee of experts who have provided input throughout this process and have been tremendously helpful in helping us shape this program and make sure it's something that really works within our existing real estate market. At the beginning of the program development process, we identified the broad goals of stewarding and protecting the town's existing deed restricted housing units and developing a process to increase the number of deed restricted units. The majority, or over 95% of our existing deed-restricted units currently are in the low income ranges, restricted to 80% area median income and below. And in our local housing bridge, which council is now very familiar with, that's the orange section here. The specific program goals developed based on advisory committee and council input are to focus on increasing the deed-restricted housing inventory in the middle incomes up to 245% AMI and to include more for-sale housing products in our deed-restricted inventory. On our housing bridge, that means that what we're looking at here is to really focus on the teal zone up to 195% AMI and the red zone between 195 and 245% AMI, where we don't currently have very much deed-restricted inventory and where we're seeing significant housing needs as well as an affordability gap. This focus is consistent with Council's 5-year housing funding priorities, which Council agreed to at the January 11th Council meeting, which recommends targets of approximately 30% of the housing funding over the next 5 years in the 80% AMI and below category, approximately 65% in the teal category of 80 to 195%, and 5% in the 195 to 245 category. And finally, we're recommending an aspirational goal of increasing the percent of Truckee's total housing stock that is deed restricted from its current level of just over 5% to 10% over the next 10 years. We think that that's a pretty aspirational and ambitious goal, but we're hopeful that through adoption of this program, as well as continued support of our more traditional affordable housing projects, we can make significant progress and reach that goal. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Warner, President of Rise Housing Solutions, to walk us through the program guidelines.
Thank you, Hillary. Good evening, Mayor and Town Council. I'm going to pull up the presentation here. So as Hillary mentioned, I will be going over kind of the high-level overview of the program guidelines that we're proposing here tonight in the draft by section. So with that, I will get started. So the compensation amounts that we are proposing in exchange for deed restriction is the lesser of 16% of the fair market value of the home, or $150,000. We've identified 4 eligible participant types. The first would be buyer households. The second is existing property owners. The third is businesses. And the fourth is builders and property developers. So the eligible use of funds would need to be a property within the boundary of the town of Truckee. We are proposing to prohibit any non-arm's length transactions. So if there's an identified interest between the buyer and the seller, such as family members, that would be prohibited, but we would allow between a landlord and a tenant. And funds are not to be used on properties with known or open code violations. The BMR program administrator, in partnership with the town, will create broad awareness and equitable access through an approved marketing plan. And the materials will be translated and available in Spanish. So the first eligible program participant type is buyer households. This is a high-level overview of the process that they'll go through, which I'll go through in more detail in a subsequent slide. But generally speaking, there will be a pre-application form that will be available during a marketing period that will be at least 30 days, where everyone who's interested in the program will submit their stated information, income and assets, to see if they're eligible for the program. And if they are, based on their stated information, they will receive a lottery number, and a lottery will be conducted and then invited to an informational workshop where they'll receive instructions on how to submit a full application with all their supporting documents, including tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs. And then they'll be reviewed in that lottery ranking order. for program eligibility. And so a conditional approval letter will be issued for 12 months where the buyer households will be able to then go shop for a home knowing that there's going to be funds available to them. And then during that 12-month window, if they are successful in entering into a purchase and sale agreement, they would then re-engage with the town and the Bmr administrator, submit their sales contract, and we would size the compensation amount for the deed restriction and record the restriction and fund the submit funds into escrow. We have also included a seller incentive. So sellers would be able to participate. The seller would be able to identify their own buyer for the home and then refer that buyer to the town and the Bmr administrator for immediate eligibility review. And the Bmr administrator would then look at the transaction, look at the appraisal, size the compensation amount for the deed restriction, and be able to quickly record. The third eligible participant type are businesses. So the town will be able to provide compensation to business owners in exchange for deed restriction at time of purchase of a property. And then the owners, the business owners, will be able to rent to their tenants at an affordable rate, and all the tenants will need to be earning less than 245% of the area median income, and will need to be engaged in at least a 12-month lease term. And then the town would be responsible for verifying tenant income in the lease terms and the rents charged on an ongoing basis. The fourth participant type is builders and developers. So developers in their existing projects that they're trying to get through entitlements, they can opt to engage the town to negotiate the sale of additional deed restrictions in their project. We are proposing in these guidelines that the area median income max for those deed restrictions would be 180% as a way to deepen the affordability on those units. And the town would, at their discretion, would be able to negotiate, more compensation for even deeper income targeting if they chose to do so. And then the town would approve of the purchasers, record the individual deed restrictions, and then steward the restrictions long-term with the rest of the Bmr portfolio. So the eligibility qualifications for applying for a unit, we're proposing 245% of the area median income to match other local programs. The asset limit would be 30% of the sales price of the home, and that's liquid assets. So that would exclude retirement accounts, life insurance, face values, 529 education accounts, things of that nature. And every person who intends to live in the unit will need to be included on the application. And all adults will need to appear as owner and co-owner. And the exceptions would be dependents that are 24 years or younger. And as part of that full application, we will require a full pre-approval letter to be required with the application to know that they are mortgage ready. Okay, so the owner requirements. The biggest one is owner occupancy. The program participants are required to be living in the home 10 out of the 12 months out of the year at minimum. There are provisions that allow for leave of absences, but no longer than 24 months for qualified reasons. And if they do, they can rent to folks earning less than 245% of the AMI at an affordable rate for at least a 12-month lease term. There are limited title transfer restrictions, so you could transfer to a spouse or domestic partner or to children at inheritance. One component that we did not include that I think was discussed earlier and is common in Bmr programs is appreciation caps. So that will not be included in the deed restriction. Refinancing. So owners will be able to will be allowed to refinance. There will be a limited amount that they'll be able to get cash out. And generally speaking, home equity lines of credit, reverse mortgages are not going to be permitted in order to protect the town's investment in the property. This is just the buyer application process in more detail. I think this is, generally speaking, we've covered this except for during the application period, They will have 2 opportunities to supply missing documentation from the application. The funds will be available on a first come, first served basis once they have that 12-month conditional approval. So I anticipate that we would oversubscribe reservations of the funds or conditional approvals, then funds are available, knowing that some folks are not going to be successful in this market. And there is an opportunity to do a 3-month extension should there be a qualifying reason, like being out of town or something like that. So if they're actively in the market searching, but they need an extension, there's the ability to do that as well. During the escrow period, that's when we will review the appraisal. That will be the appraisal and the purchase contract are going to be the biggest drivers for providing the amount of compensation and providing the final approval and checking for code violations. And then prior to closing, the town or the BMR administrator will do a pre-closing meeting with the buyer to ensure that they understand everything that they're signing up for before they're at the title company signing the restrictions and getting it recorded. So the process for reselling a BMR unit is going to be a little bit different. The BMR administrator will be there to assist with the process, providing BMR disclosures, education to the agents, and providing, we could market if the program is still active and the town has a list, or the BMR administrator has a list of interested buyers, could certainly help with marketing. The new buyer will be subject to the same qualification criteria as the current owner. So if it's in 180% AMI restriction, the new buyer will need to be 180% AMI. The seller will be responsible for identifying the eligible purchaser, and there will be a recordation of a new deed restriction. So it resets the clock to 55-year restriction. And then finally, the financing requirements. So each of the applicants or the program participants will be required to get a first mortgage loan that is 30-year fixed rate, fully documented, conventional, no negative amortizing loans, anything like that, or balloon payment loans are allowed. And co-signing or guaranteeing a loan is generally not allowed to qualify for the first mortgage. It has to be occupying household members on the first mortgage for qualification. And that concludes the program guidelines highlights.
Thanks, Matt. I did just want to highlight that we made one change after the agenda was published, which was included as additional information with the agenda packet, and that was a modification to the renting and leave of absence terms. As Matt noted, there's no short-term renting allowed in the BMR units, and we do have a provision for an approved leave of absence, which would allow for up to 2 years of long-term renting the home, the full home, when there's qualified reasons for leave of absence. The addition we made is a modification to clarify that long, which is spelled with two L's here, just to emphasize, long-term renting a bedroom is permitted to a qualified tenant, and that is not restricted to a leave of absence period. So if perhaps a child goes off to college or for some other reason a bedroom becomes available, we certainly would like that bedroom to be used, so you could rent that out to a long-term tenant. And right here we have that modified language that was added and is included as additional information. Moving on to program administration, which is our second topic tonight. If Town Council approves the program guidelines this evening, as a next step, staff recommends hiring a third-party administrator to set up and administer the program, at least for the first year. In researching other deed restriction programs, staff found that the majority of programs do use a third-party administrator because of the level of expertise needed regarding real estate transactions. A summary of anticipated administrator services is provided in the staff report. It includes a list here, which includes being the main point of contact with interested program participants, setting up and overseeing the program application and lottery process, document preparation, marketing, among others. With council approval, as a next step, staff would solicit proposals for a third-party administrator to bring on board this spring, with final program preparations take place this spring with a goal of launching the program by this summer. So with that, Our recommendations are that Town Council approve the BMR draft program guidelines, including the modified Section 2.2B, and to direct staff to request proposals for third-party administrator to operate the town's BMR housing program.
Hillary, thank you so much. Matt, thank you for being here as well. We will move into council questions, and sort of depending on how long those take, we'll get through as many as we can, and then we'll break at about 7 o'clock. I know we had a lot of council questions in advance, and just want to thank staff for all of the thoughtful responses. I know you had several that you answered for us, so thank you for that.
I'd like to pass that thanks on to our consultants who did the heavy lifting on that as well.
And thank you again. Councilmember Pallavi, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and I know I told you both I had none, but now I have a few, so that's what happens between Sunday and Tuesday usually for me. So just a couple of first clarifications. So this phase one, Hillary, all 4 entities, buyer households, existing property owners, local businesses, and building and property developers, those would all be part of this initial phase. And the only thing we're excluding is multifamily in phase one, or maybe just give me a little bit of color on that.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. And why do we care how long people create a leave of absence for if they are still renting within our AMI guidelines?
That's something we did go back and forth on, and Aaron or Matt, if you want to jump in, you're welcome. But the intent there is that really the purpose of this program is to support home buyers. So if the property is not being used as a primary residence by the purchaser, we were inclined to provide provisions so that the home would turn over if the long-term intent is no longer to use it as a primary residence. Aaron, do you have anything else to add that I might be not remembering from our discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Hillary, and thank you, members of the council. There was a bit of a balancing act here where there was concern that, say, someone would purchase a home, participate in the program, maybe they move back east and decide they're just going to live there and then keep this as a property. They're not necessarily participating in the community. The idea, I think, behind the leave of absence policy is to try and turn over that unit for somebody who's, actively living and working in the community. It's a little bit challenging because opening that up makes administration of business participation easier. It also opens up the program to allow local investors to purchase units and make them available for full-time occupancy, which are both, generally goals of the program. So it was one of those policy points that was heavily discussed in the advisory committee, and it's something that is at the council's prerogative to adjust.
And I guess it looks like the advisory committee didn't necessarily agree with the recommendation that were being presented, or they were sort of mixed, but it seems like they didn't necessarily come out super in favor or against either direction, I guess. And I think if we look at it through the lens of the program, I get where you're coming from, like we want to turn over for purchase inventory, but if we look at it through the lens of housing program more generally, it's 50-50, right? Like we're really, that's more of a policy discussion, and to get through, there's no necessarily right answer. It determines more the goals.
Yeah, I think that's generally right. The advisory committee was generally split on it. There were varying opinions, and people kind of went back and forth on the topic. Simplifying the program and kind of removing that, again, streamlines the program a little bit, makes it easier to administer. That said, some people are a little bit concerned that with a program of this kind, the fewer stipulations you have, the easier it is to maybe, take advantage of the program a little bit. So again, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that. Talk to me a little bit about there's something in the program guidelines. So let me take a step back on staying on this topic. And so we're going to actually administer a official leave of absence form or website or whatever the heck it ends up looking like, but we are actually going to administer like verification of leave of absence for X period of time.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, that is how the guidelines are written, is that we would field the request for leave of absence and the qualifying reason, and we would want to substantiate the leave, and then we would be looking at the proposed lease and qualifying the tenant and tracking that lease termination date and seeing what the intent is at the end of that 12-month period to see if they're going to renew for another 12 months.
And I might have missed it or read too quickly. So did we get a cost estimate on the program administration, or that's sort of phase 2? We don't actually know. And the resulting question out of that becomes, if it becomes like this hourly type of rate that we're dealing with, I think that changes to me personally. I don't know how the rest of everybody else feels, but if we're moving on an annual contract basis, sure, that's one thing. If we're going to be billed per client, per inquiry, per hourly, whatever it is, that changes the dynamic a little bit for some of the program guidelines.
Yeah, we have not yet put out an RFP, so we don't have a final cost on what that administration would be.
Right. But we have to approve the program guidelines before the RFP. Are there opportunities to amend once we get the RFP? Can we amend some of those things based on the kind of responses we get back? I think it'd be a shame to spend $250,000 to enforce a 2-year leave of absence, when there's, I don't know, I go to the voting fraud thing, like, do we have proof that people are, abusing this why don't we just let the program run? Okay, there's abuse. Okay, now we got to tighten it down a little bit versus letting it run, do its thing, and go back the other direction.
It's always council's prerogative to update the program guidelines if you would so choose.
Awesome. Okay, switch gears. Let's go to the business scenario for a moment. So I think it was in your presentation, Matt, you had something in there where the business owner purchases a property, and then their rents have to be approved by the administrator. Can you explain that, and especially explain how those will be determined? And is it a ratio of cost per bedroom? Is it a ratio of spend? How does a business owner even start to approach those types of calculations to figure out if this is something they want to do or not?
Sure. Yeah. The way it's written now is that the rents would be calculated at 30% of income of a 245% tenant. So I know that there's other programs that calculate this, and I believe that the intent is that we would mirror that, the other housing programs that calculate the affordability by kind of household size.
So we're basically taking the employees' pay stubs for X amount of time, and we're going at 30% of that?
It would essentially cap the maximum rent at 30% of income at 245% of AMI, which I believe is substantially over
that
current
even
market.
Boggles my mind. Can we make that way simpler?
It's essentially market rate, but there's a maximum that you could charge.
So what does that mean, though? Go ahead, Matt. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, it's not 30% of actual tenant income. It's 30% of 245% AMI. So that whatever that number is probably higher than market rent at this point, is what Aaron was explaining.
And that is going to be the maximum in individual tenant or bedroom or what?
It's a great question.
Because that's a really big difference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe we've specified that in the guidelines, so that's something we need to add.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the way you might approach it would be to have a formula for calculating the typical occupancy for a specific size unit. So a common assumption is one person per bedroom plus one to use to calculate the max affordability there.
And so then that would pencil into...
So then you'd compare the maximum number of occupants to the, county income limits,
and then go
track it over to the associated income, and then take
245,
30%.
and then take 30% of that.
Yeah.
Yep. And that will be left to the program administrator to basically package up, market, figure out how to actually communicate that back out.
Yeah, so the town maintains income limits, and I believe that's on the town's website. So that information would be readily available. And I think what would need to be added to the guidelines is just that formula for calculating occupancy.
Right. I need to do some math while my other council members ask some questions. So, okay, a couple other questions. Why the discrepancy? So I read both in some of the council members' questions prior to the meeting, read a little bit of the committee's recommendation to not have an AMI cap. Can there be a sale price cap versus an AMI cap? Is that a possible lever, or does it have to be AMI? Because I don't believe, and the reason where I'm going with it, and then I'll let you answer it, because clearly we have these AMI discussions on every single housing item. We all know it's challenging, median home price through the roof. So why not take a price of 1.5 or 2 million, because we're really trying to just secure inventory long term if that's our goal, versus taking it from an AMI perspective, because those numbers are going to be quite different.
Right, and there are trade-offs to either approach. Generally speaking, I think the preference has been for an AMI focus, because it means you're clearly serving a certain segment of the population, and there's less of a chance for households that really don't require additional assistance to benefit from town funds.
Mm-hmm. But we're making the assumption that even at 245% of AMI means you can afford a $1.2 million, 1.1 median home price home, right? So it's sort of supply demand. In today's market, who the heck knows what happens 2 years from now, right? And then my last question, I think, is, can the deed restriction be terminated in any way by the holder of said restriction? Who's actually, the buyer is the holder, right? The property owner is the holder of the deed restriction, or the town is the holder of the deed restriction?
The town is.
The town is the holder of the deed restriction. Can the deed restriction be terminated by any party throughout its duration, either by market forces or litigant forces?
Well, I mean, the idea is to come up with a program that is legally not vulnerable. I mean, I think everything that we're doing is fairly well-trod ground. We're not doing anything that's kind of legally out on the frontier. I don't think that the idea has been to allow the owner to kind of buy their way out of the deed restriction or otherwise escape it, other than by living in the house for 55 years without selling it, at which point it would drop off. But as a practical matter, that's pretty unlikely to happen. I think that by design, it's been intended that once they take the money and once the deed restriction is there, that it will be on the property more or less indefinitely.
And can that property, should 2 years go, do we have an assurance that there will always be a market, right? I mean, we can make plans for right now when we know our housing market is the way it is. What happens in 10 years when we've built 10,000 units and we've built out and everything's great and housing prices are back at $400,000 and there becomes no market left to sell a property with a deed restriction?
So I think that the deed restriction could be drafted, our hypothetical deed restriction could be drafted so as to specifically allow the town to release it if the town chose to do so, without specifying the circumstances under which that could occur. And that would give the town council flexibility in the future to potentially release some of these in response to changing conditions.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Andy.
I think I would also just add that we really have to have a conversation about that. We know economies change, they ebb and flow, we go into recessions and we're in booms, that we could be in a situation in 10 years where the market's very different, but do we want to release deed restrictions we've worked really hard to get for the future? So it'll just be a long conversation.
And I want to be very clear, when I'm talking about releasing a deed restriction, it would have to be, in some way an exchange. I'm not saying we're going to just let it go. I would say it has to be at least repaid at, whatever, 2% or whatever the low is. I think that is all of my questions. Thank you for now.
Okay. Vice Mayor Romack, shall we get through a few more questions?
Sure. Sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. A few questions, and I'm going to move my iPad over here. So what happens if we find somebody is violating their deed, like they live outside their house for 4 months a year? What's the penalty? What happens?
Matt, would you like to address how that typically works?
Sure. Yeah, typically there will be language in the deed restriction that would trigger a default under the deed restriction, and it would allow for it would give the owner an opportunity to cure, or it would give the town their right to trigger their exercise of right of first refusal, so they could essentially buy the unit back at market value. But again, this is in a deed restriction that's still hypothetical. We haven't drafted the terms just yet.
Thank you. And for the developers, I know the idea is, that would be a lower AMI, 180% for a new unit. Would there be a maximum sale price that they could sell them at? I know I think the deed restriction would still be 16% of the sale price, but what if, they want to make a $1.5 million unit and that doesn't make any sense? So just curious, how that works. I don't know who answers this one.
You want to take that, Hillary? So generally speaking, that type of scenario would be rather unlikely, mainly because they would be restricted in terms of the maximum income of the purchaser. So it depends on that purchaser's purchasing power. So, we know their income, say it's 180 AMI, they would have, less than 30% of, the purchase price in assets, and then they would receive payment in exchange for deed restriction. So, it depends on what all that adds up to in terms of their ability to qualify for financing, the amount of money that they have for a down payment, plus any funds received in exchange for the deed restriction, in terms of what that ultimate sale price could be. Generally speaking, they would be limited in terms of financing to roughly 30%. Sometimes, well-qualified buyers can extend a bit beyond that. And so those factors would generally be your limiting considerations.
Got it. And ultimately, the town, we would decide if we want to enter into this agreement, so we could make restrictions with the developers, I would assume too, right?
Yes, the developer scenario requires council approval to move forward, so it would always be at council's discretion.
I should add on to my previous answer about a circumstance under which a deed restriction might go away, and that is if it's wiped out in foreclosure. Because probably we would end up having to subordinate these deed restrictions to financing, and that would mean that it would be a junior encumbrance. And if the senior encumbrance or the senior lender decided to foreclose, we would become what's known in the trade as a sold-out junior, meaning that it would be wiped out unless we decided to somehow redeem the default in the senior loan, which could be kind of expensive. But that is a scenario, and that has happened with affordable housing deed restrictions around the state from time to time.
Thank you. Let's see, a few more questions. Well, I think for community members, I know this was a question that was asked, but with the lottery system, how many people do we envision being selected in the lottery? So how many people would be available at the beginning of this process?
So I'll hand that to Matt. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would envision that we would probably invite 30 people or 30 households to apply initially. And then based on those, the actual amount of submissions that we get and how many folks are conditionally approved to go out and shopping for a home, we would slowly meter additional households in to apply with full applications, with the idea that if we had 25, 30 households out there shopping, would probably be a good number to start with.
Thank you. And then I know there's a requirement that folks can't currently own a home within the region in order to qualify, but folks could own a home outside the region. Can somebody explain kind of what the thought was behind that?
Sure. The thinking behind that is that if you have somebody moving from a state where the cost of housing may be substantially lower than Truckee, and then moving to Truckee, say for a job with the town of Truckee, it can be a significant barrier to entry into the market, even though they may already have an asset. They still would need to qualify based off of their assets being no more than 30% of the purchase price. I think I got that amount right. So if they had a home that was worth an equivalent amount to a home in Truckee, they would not be able to qualify. But if they're moving from somewhere where they have a home worth $100,000, they would likely qualify for this program.
Thank you. And then it looks like the committee recommended no AMI cap, but staff is recommending 245. Is that kind of based on council's direction at previous meetings or based on other discussions? Kind of where did that figure come from?
The staff's recommendation to have an AMI cap is based on some of the legal challenges that we have with having a geographical work requirement for housing. So Andy may want to speak to that and why that's not something we're recommending. So in place of having a working within the school district requirement, staff's recommendation is to prohibit STRs, have an AMI cap, and require the home be used as a full-time residence. The 245 was based off of, partially off of feedback from council in December, as well as the advisory committee feedback.
Yeah, it's not that that location-based restrictions are completely invalid. That's not it. But in general, anything that we do that makes it harder for people to move here from farther away is a little, once we start going down that road, it gets a little bit more tricky. Some jurisdictions have established kind of residency requirements before you can participate in programs offered by the jurisdiction. That's probably not something we would want to do. If it was something that was just anyone who has a job here from day one could be eligible to participate, that could work. But we would not want to do something like you have to have been employed here for 2 years before you could participate in a town program.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. And then this is kind of just a question probably for the housing experts. I find it interesting, the AMI levels, and looking at the 245, if you have two people, it says there's, 4526 available per month for housing. If you have 5 people, you'd have over 6,000 available per month. And I get if you have 5 adults working in a house, that makes sense. But I think about, a couple and then they have 3 kids. When you have 3 kids, how does all of a sudden your purchasing power go up by 1,500?
So it's not necessarily that your purchasing power goes up if you have more people in the household. It's that the amount you need to make to have the same standard of living is higher. So if you have the same income but more people in the household, your actual standard of living is less and is more equivalent to a household at a lower income. Hopefully that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah, thank you. I think that's just something for us as we're thinking about AMI levels, even if it shows you could afford this, somebody who has, again, 3 kids, they have a lot of costs that they're incurring and, they might not be able to pay $6,113 a month. All right, that's it for questions for now.
Can I just do a super quick tie-on? So just to clarify, the actual lottery section of this is only for buyers, right? The other 3 categories don't have to they're more at will. And specifically, seller, obviously, that's fairly easy because you're finding a buyer. developer coming to council, where does the business silo fit into the lottery picture and funding picture?
Correct. Just the buyer one would be under the lottery. The business also would require council approval.
Oh, business requires council approval as well.
Yes.
Got it. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are a little after 7. Is everyone comfortable if we take a break? I know we're kind of in the middle of questions, so That's fine. That's okay? Okay, so I have 7:07. Let's take a 10-minute break, so we'll come back at 7:17 and continue with council questions with council members Klostad and Zabriskie. Thank you. Okay, we will come back to order. We are on agenda item 7.2, which is related to our below market rate housing program, and we're still in council questions. So Councilmember Klovstad, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I focused in on the code violations aspect of this. I don't know a lot of homes, especially affordable ones, that don't have some existing code violations. So one of the things I was wondering is, and also having gone through several escrows where there's always something coming up that you're worried you're going to fall out of escrow for. So is there an opportunity to support the home buyer in helping to correct some of those possible building code violations so that we don't have homes fall out of this program?
There certainly could be. I guess I would ask if you have a suggestion in mind of what type of support you would be suggesting.
So I think it would probably be part of the process of looking at when does the home inspection happen, and then making sure that we have a optimal amount of time to provide corrective actions. And knowing also that probably the thin margins some of these purchases are going to happen at, perhaps there's an opportunity to provide some of that financial support, and maybe it comes out of the percent of the that we're contributing to the purchase, but it's just some way of making sure that we don't have homes that are almost through the program and then we find a code violation and our ordinance says we can't contribute to a building with a code violation and it all falls apart.
So I think the way the guidelines are currently written, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's only for known existing code violation cases. So there would have to be a violation case filed with the town in order for it to register. And Matt can also add that I believe the guidelines have the inspections being, are the inspections submitted to the program administrator for review?
They're not. It's required that they get a general and a pest, but the Bmr program administrator in the town are not going to be reviewing those inspections.
Okay, so these are more specifically for, say, you added an illegal unit and that has been reported, and then those would not be eligible until it's corrected.
I believe that's correct.
So those would be much more on the seller's responsibility side.
I believe that's correct. And I think the intention is to catch the large, significant, things that would mean, substandard living conditions, those types of issues.
Not the extra bathroom that was remodeled and expanded or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Decarbonizing our building stock is one of our goals. And one of the challenges in that we're facing is understanding the specifics of the existing building stock. Is there a possibility that there could be some sort of short survey added to this application process where we could find out the size of the home, how it's heated, the age of construction, just some basic information to help inform those other processes and goals?
And you're thinking specifically on when at the point of sale, when a home actually enters into the program?
Correct.
I think that could be a requirement if council would like to add that.
I think there's just a half a dozen questions that could be very informative, particularly in some of the programs that we're looking at developing in the near future.
Why didn't you add that to the short-term rental questionnaire?
What a great idea when we start doing permits again. That would be a great thing to add on to it.
Seems like the same thing that you're trying to get at.
Yeah, trying to get some basic information. Yeah, thank you for that idea. And then so also towards the goal of decarbonizing our buildings, and this is something that Jen, you and I have talked about, is just having some sort of level of building efficiency, helping that home replace light bulbs and sealed ducts and just some basic energy efficiency improvements before the point of sale. Is that something that has been discussed further?
That's not something that's been discussed specifically in relation to this program. That is something that we are working on separately with our Keep Truckee Green program at sort of existing building stock and sustainability programs that we can implement there.
So that being an offering as part of this program.
Once we have that type of a program in place, we can certainly offer it to participants in this program.
It would be like in conjunction with this program, so not solely as part of this program, but you could take advantage of it once it's in place, whether you're participating in this program or any other STR, incentive. We've talked about that for people that have long-term rented before we did the long-term or the workforce housing grant program, that they could take advantage or be first in line perhaps. So a combination of the different programs.
Great. So something else to add to the checklist that people are offered. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie.
Let me preface my questions by saying I have three basic concerns. Is whether the higher AMI that was recommended by the committee solves anything. And then I'm concerned about the process that we're asking potential buyers to go through being complicated and extended and uncertain. And then I'm concerned that the draft guidelines, as they're written right now, are unclear and contradictory. That's reflected in the questions I posed in the questions and answers. And I haven't seen a draft deed restriction or the frequently asked questions that are referenced in the staff report. Going to my first concern, I realize that the goal is to be able to deed restrict about 4 homes per year for over the course of 4 years. And then connected to the question about the higher AMI is whether we have the housing stock on market to achieve this, the deed restrictions at a lower AMI. And I very much appreciate the answers to the questions I posed, by the way. That those were very responsive and complete, and what they also showed was that over the course of 2021, we had 11 single-family homes on average per month that sold for less than $800,000, 8 condos that sold for less per month for less than $800,000. In response to another question, the median sales price in 2021 for condos was $620,000, and then it was noted it could be up to $700,000 right now in these last couple months. And then single-family homes, 271 of those sold in 2021 for $965,000. If we take a look at a family of 4 at 195% AMI with the deed restrictions, they can afford these houses and this housing. So increasing the AMI is not needed to reach the people at 195% and under. And in terms of the number of participants in this hemispherical pie chart, it notes that there's 1,332 units needed between 80% and 195% AMI. So we're certainly not going to be hurting for people wanting to apply. So just on that one point, why is it that we would want to go above 195% AMI?
So there's a couple reasons that that recommendation was put forward, and it mainly has to do with the experience under the Placer County Workforce Protection Program. They initially started at a lower AMI level, I'm forgetting exactly what that was, and have subsequently raised it, I believe, twice, mainly due to an inability of the participating households to secure a unit. It's not entirely clear what the driver is for that, but the general sense is that it has to do with the competitiveness of those households for units. So even though, as you indicated, and the data does substantiate that, a significant number of units, far more than we would need to absorb the amount of funding available, did sell within the target price range in 2021, suggesting that there's an inventory there. There's a question of who's actually securing those units, who's ultimately successful at purchasing them. And the sense is that a significant number of those households were, large cash or all cash offers that were essentially significantly more competitive than the types of households we anticipate would participate in this type of a program. I think you're definitely right in identifying that to some extent households could increase the amount that they're able to pay for a housing unit beyond what's identified as an affordable purchase price on the table, but that also presumes that they already have an adequate down payment available and then can apply that additional cash towards increasing the purchase price. And I think for the most part, the types of households that we're talking about don't have that significant down payment in place. So the expectation is most of the cash payment coming from the town would go to supplement a down payment, getting it up towards that 20% that's required to be, frankly, in this market, almost minimally competitive in some instances.
Okay. I would also add, Councilmember Zabriskie, Nevada County has a maximum mortgage value regardless of the purchase, regardless of the sale price of the home. And I'm not sure that I read through your question again, and I'm not sure that that's being calculated all the way through. The maximum Nevada County mortgage is what, $485? Does anybody know off the top of their head?
I think it's gone up in the last year. I want to say it's in the 600,000 range.
Oh, it's up to 6 now.
Yeah, it went up this last year due to COVID-induced price increases. But still, I think your point is valid in that without going into jumbo loan territory,
you have to increase your down payment. Between an $875,000 home, you need a down payment at 20% minimum, plus that maximum 620, and you're potentially still not there. So that was one way that I was reading through that as well. I think if you're not taking into account that maximum mortgage, then it's different.
You're losing me a little bit. Are you talking about the down payment or the entire mortgage?
I'm talking about the entire package. Your question was, why are we going up to 245 of income, right?
Yes.
And so my point is, one of the reasons why we're going up to that level is because that combination, to be competitive at an actual purchase, has to include all of those different tiers and numbers.
Okay, I didn't see this in the staff report, and what I understand, let me put this aside and we can come back to this. You mentioned Placer County providing an example. The last information we saw presented to the council was that Placer County had 245% cap for single-family homes, 220% for condos. It had 11 potential buyers who got past pre-approval, and no transactions had closed. What's the situation now?
That, as far as I know, is current.
Okay, so Placer County's at 245%, but it's still not working. Correct. Okay, you mentioned all cash offers or people with a lot of money being more successful. Doesn't that go to the certainty and the quickness with which the seller can close?
Generally, yes.
Yes. And then in terms of somebody who actually has to go borrow money to close and come up with money for a deposit, the seller doesn't see any of that money until the action closes. Well, he may see a little earnest money, but generally he doesn't see any of that money until it closes, and then he sees all of it. He just has to wait longer, correct? And there's a risk that maybe the financing's not going to come through, or it's going to be delayed. Okay, I'm having trouble seeing that then translating into the idea that somebody at a higher AMI level that still needs to borrow money is going to be able to compete with the person who comes in with cash on the barrelhead and says, we're going to skip financing. I got it in my hip pocket.
That's generally a fair assessment. The idea, broadly with the idea of having a higher AMI threshold is that as AMI increases, creditworthiness increases, the likelihood that they'll have some significant contribution to the down payment of their own increases. So it does influence the potential for success, but you're absolutely right. There's significant headwinds regardless.
Okay. And we're requiring under these draft guidelines, we would require that the potential buyer have no more than 30% in liquid assets, correct?
Correct.
And the program would give them 16%, well, up to the $150,000 cap, would give them 16%, so they only need to come up with 4% more to hit the 20% down payment that Councilmember Pallavi was talking about.
Correct.
Okay. Let me go on then to the next thing. It has to do with the process being complicated, and this is kind of continuing on with what appears to me from what we're being told from the real estate brokers and the committee, the real issue being how quickly a transaction can close, contract can close. What can we do, or what do the draft guidelines do to overcome that issue?
That's a great question that I'll pass to Matt with Rise Housing.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. It's in these deed restricted programs, it's extremely difficult to have quick closing times. And it's really because there's a lot of steps. We need to wait to get the purchase and sale agreement. We hope we get that within 3 business days of getting into contract. We to start the process to get final approval for the loan. We need to wait for the appraisal to actually come in to look to finalize the compensation amount. We need to search for code violations, draft the deed restrictions, route them for signatures, coordinate with finance to send the money into escrow, things of that nature. So generally speaking, in below market rate housing programs, a 30-day close is pretty typical. And that's true in down payment assistance programs and jurisdictions around the Bay Area as well. I think there's probably an opportunity for the BMR administrator and town staff to maybe shave a day here or there, but maybe get it down to a 25-day close. But it's really hard to guarantee that, particularly if someone's on vacation or something like that. So that's the reason for the 30-day close of escrow timeline in the guidelines.
Of course. Now, I'm retired, and I moved up here shortly before retiring. But if I'd moved up here before retiring, and let's say I owned my house, but I took all the cash from the house that I made selling the house and paid off my debts, and so my liquid assets did not amount to 30% of my income, and as it turns out, I'm not up there at 245% AMI. I could still qualify for the program up here, right? I could get this money and buy a house and live here in retirement.
I believe that's correct, and there would also be a deed restricted on the unit.
Yes. Yeah. And then if I were a tech worker in Silicon Valley and I met the income and asset requirements, I could move up here and do remote work for Google or whoever. I'd be a real low-level employee at Google to make it, but I'd be able to do that under this program. And then in terms of How soon do I find out that I'm going to get 16% of the purchase price? At what point in the process? Is that when the pre-application's approved?
Matt?
Yeah, so you wouldn't get final verification until we received the purchase and sale agreement and the appraisal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd have to enter a purchase contract first, and I'd want to have a clause in there that says I can back out if I don't get the money from the town.
Yeah, you could certainly include a loan contingency in there.
I'd have to get the seller to agree. Okay. Those are all the questions I have.
At what point, just to follow up on that, at what point do you know how much you're going to get? And what is that based on?
Sure. Yeah, the conditional approval will say you're eligible up to 16% or $150,000. So the terms will be pretty clear in the approval or the conditional approval, but we won't be able to set the final loan amount until we get the appraisal.
And so some of that money could either be used to lessen the mortgage, it could be used to offset down payment, it could be used for any purpose within the transaction.
Yes.
It doesn't have to go to a specific purpose within the transaction.
Right. The idea is that the intent is that it would reduce principal on the first mortgage, but it could go towards closing costs or other things as well.
Okay. And then just one more quick question to follow up on Councilmember Zabriskie as well. I mean, would you characterize a lot of these transactions that these are psychological choices by the seller? If they are going to go through the extra process to wait for, you put your house on the market, it's $850,000, you have a cash seller or cash buyer, you have a buyer with X, you have a buyer with Y, and then you have a deed restricted buyer, and everybody's in the same group. You're right. You're not going to win a cash sale if the seller doesn't care. So what my question is do you see in other communities that a lot of these are psychological choices by the sellers to go after buyers who are part of this program?
So I do. In a similar program, the Bmr program administrator creates collateral that actually goes and talks a little bit about the program, the intent, what it's meant to do, and to submit with application packages to almost make their offer seem more attractive as a participant in this program. Mm-hmm. And hoping that if all else equal, offer price, that they would select this buyer or even be willing to take a little bit less. Or that, if the offer amount is $5,000 over, $10,000 over, it's worth waiting that extra week or whatever it is to close escrow or to be able to accept the contingencies that are going to be in that offer.
I mean, I think that's also what we have to consider as council is that this doesn't necessarily have to compete apples to apples in the exact same market as everything else that's happening out there. We already know because we have property owners coming to us saying they want to do this. And that is a different type of seller than the seller that's out there for the highest, quickest, best offer. And I think that a lot of these questions are important to flesh out, but I also want to make clear that these are psychological decisions. They're not purely financially driven. And that is really important to the terms of how this program has been created. Not a question, sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. I think it was a really good comment. Thank you for that. Okay, any final questions? Yeah. Councilmember Zabriskie.
Do we know what the current status is of the market in terms of how many homes are available in Truckee right now?
I don't have those statistics at hand, although I think you did mention a couple statistics with regard to home sales over the last couple of months. So for January and February of 2022, there have been 40 single-family sales, 10 condo sales. There were 14 single-family sales under $800,000, 9 under $800,000 for condos.
I was just looking just for fun. There are currently 4 houses or 4 dwellings of any kind listed for under $900,000. There's a 1-bedroom cabin with no garage over in the Armstrong tract for $600. There's a Boulders condo, 2-bed, 2-bath, very nice, for $725. A house in Sierra Meadows for $875, and then a house on West River that is not inhabitable at all for $599. That's what there is for under $900,000 in Truckee.
You found 4?
I did.
Kinda.
Sorta.
Okay.
Really 3.
Okay, I happened to look at Redfin. I'm glad you did that too, Andy. I don't know if Redfin's covering all of Truckee or not. I'm not a realtor, but my numbers are very similar, except I only found 3 under 900,000. I found 7 under $1 million and 5 between 1 and 2 million for those looking. So right now is not a great time to be a buyer under any program.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, it's a little bit unfair to look at the season right now, though, because this isn't typically a peak season. That houses will start to come on the market in the spring and then more actively be available through summer. And then there's sort of another peak that happens within kind of the holiday season.
Yep.
So this is really the downtime when people just aren't listing their houses.
Absolutely. And not only that, this is a really unusual time in our housing market, and we're hoping that this program would last decades and produce hundreds of deed-restricted units, hopefully past this period.
Okay. Do we have any data or information about psychological inclinations or anything else indicating we have people in Truckee who are ready to take the risk and wait the time? I think Councilmember Pallavi has data that hasn't been shared
I mean, I've had 4 people ask me just in the past month, and I happen to be sitting in Quality Automotive with Jim Porter, who is one of the most vocal, who we actually got a public comment from.
It would help if we actually had something more evidentiary, something more in the nature of a record other than anecdotes from fellow council members on that point. Not that I don't dispute what you say, but it's just, I'm thinking
There's
in
no
terms
program,
of
so
process.
there's no program, so there's nothing for them to.
Well, it doesn't sound like the committee engaged in any kind of survey of that nature.
So Councilmember Zabriskie, when we originally brought this concept back in summer to ask if we should move forward, I think it was the week that it was brought back, we did have a resident reach out coincidentally and say they were selling a home. They wanted to sell it to a local, and did the town have any programs to help with that? So even before the program started, we did have one inquiry. That person has since sold their home because we were in the development phase, but Shauna had heard from other realtors, they felt like there was a market out there for people that really wanted to preserve their homes for local workforce. But we had received at least one inquiry. And have you received any since then?
We've received a few additional inquiries more recently than that. At this point, it is really anecdotal, but Shauna also, as Jen mentioned, did have some conversations with realtors about the feasibility of this program, and realtors indicated that they thought that this would be successful.
And at what price?
I don't think a specific price was discussed, but just in terms of that psychological decision between a non-BMR purchaser, perhaps a cash offer, and a BMR purchaser, and realtors felt like some sellers would be inclined to go with the deed-restricted purchaser.
Do we have anything to indicate whether they were over or above $937,000?
In terms of the conversations with realtors, I don't have any data on that. In terms of the anecdotal, I had a recent inquiry just this week, and it was in the $600,000 to $700,000 range.
So I know Councilmember Pallavi mentioned at our last council meeting that he knew someone with $1 million home that wanted to do the BMR program. Other than does anyone in the room know of any price we're talking about such that we would need to go up to over 195% AMI to carry this program forward?
I mean, as I stated, I've had literally 4 very specific people come to me 4 individuals come to me in the last 30 days. I did not ask them what their perceived home value was or what they would be selling for. I merely said, hang tight, we're moving as quickly as we can. Regardless, at least my answer to you, again, is going to be similar to some of the comments I'm going to make. We've, both Placer and us at the town, we've started a lot of these programs with significant limitations on them, only to have to come back and redo everything and then open up those limitations. So my comments are going to be very much of, let's shoot high. If we perceive that our money is not being effectively used, if there's abuse from, people renting for too long, whatever it is, then we can come back and crack down more. But to crack down from the start is going to eliminate a lot of opportunity. Potentially, we just don't know. And I think that's so much of all the work we've been doing here is it's uncertain and it's unknown and we don't know what's going to stick. And we need to give it a couple of years to flesh itself out. So be flexible.
Okay, I noticed that the Placer County guidelines are 6 pages long and ours are 12 pages. Did we work with Placer County at all in terms of developing our guidelines or try to follow them in any way, keep them as short?
We have checked in with Placer County throughout this process. Maybe Matt might want to speak specifically to the extent to which he looked at those guidelines in developing ours. But in terms of trying to align sort of the basics of the program, that was certainly our intent.
Yeah, absolutely. I reviewed them in crafting these guidelines, but I didn't necessarily use their guidelines as a model, but they were reviewed in tandem when creating our guidelines for Truckee.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie, I'd also add, I know the town with the developer aspect and the business aspect, that's not currently in Placer County's model. So adding those other buckets, that adds a few more pages, I'm sure. So that's one way where I know it differs a little bit.
Thanks.
I think you had one more question, Vice Mayor Romack?
I just had a question related to the table. It doesn't take into account HOA monthly fees, correct, on the amount available for housing?
Yeah, that's correct. Sometimes we incorporate that. In other cases, we don't. It sort of depends on the market. And admittedly, the table also is a little outdated. So the mortgage terms there, we'd likely encounter a slightly higher interest rate at this point in time compared to when we initially prepared the table. Those things shift rather regularly.
And do you have any, since you look at numbers like this all the time, if we're looking at an HOA of $300 a month, how that would affect the price you'd be able to afford?
Yeah, so it would come directly out of what you're assumed to have available for housing in terms of the mortgage principal that you can support. So it would generally reduce the maximum home price that you'd be able to afford.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone has had their questions answered. Perfect. So with that, we will open public comment. Does anyone from the public have a comment they would like to make on this agenda item this evening? And seeing none, we will close public comment and move right into council deliberations. Councilmember Pallavi, we'll turn back to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Lot of really good work here. Appreciate coming back with this program so quickly. I kind of made my pitch at the end of that question there. Sorry. And I do think, I just at the outset, I see, the multifamily piece also coming down the pike as soon as we can get it, and just want to encourage us to be continuing down the planning process at the same time that we're implementing sort of part one. With that all being said and out of the way, I think everything is pretty good the way it is. I can absolutely live with the way that the report is being presented. One of the only small things I would say is I just don't think we need that extra limitation on the 2 years. I think if we're looking at our housing programs more at the programmatic level than as individual as individual policies or programs underneath each other, to me, they're supporting each other. And if the restrictions are in place for a renter, I don't really care how people are getting housed at this point. To me, it's more important to retain housing, to keep people renting, and to me, the 2-year thing is somewhat arbitrary, other than the fact that it would, potentially create turnover. But I also see it as a sort of an unneeded burden to put on an administrator right out of the gate. It seems like we find something wrong, we'll tackle that problem when we get to it. So I'm more of the ilk of, let's be flexible, let's open it up, let's be as there's already a lot of confusion that a home buyer is going to have to go through, not to mention a business owner as well. So I'm in favor of the way it sits, with that one exception of just axing, just cross that whole piece out, and there doesn't as long as the renting requirements are there, I don't care about a 2-year limit or whatever else. I think that was really the only issue I had. And I do just want to, reiterate, I think this is a psychological play. This is to allow, to me, Councilmember Zabriskie, I think the example that you gave, I think about it in the reverse, of you being a retired person moving to the community. I think about it in the reverse, because I feel like most, we're not a very friendly retiree community. It's hard life, there's less expensive places to live if you're on a pension. There's other places to do it. And personally, I see more retirees somewhat leaving sometimes than coming, although that's also anecdotal. And so by limiting their ability to turn over their asset simply because we put in these income restrictions when there may be means out there for people to afford that, to me, I personally, I would scrap the 245 cap and just see what happens. And if we need to put some caps on later, fine. But I'm still going to argue at the minimum to keep that 245 cap, to allow some of those higher priced properties to move through the system as well, and provide opportunity, for retirement and on your asset that you've sat on for however long you've sat on it. So I think that's part of the equation. It's not just serving the buyer, it's also allowing the seller to make the right psychological choice that they're choosing to make, but also, there's going to be some give and take within that. So that's where I would come down on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Pallavi. Vice Mayor Romack.
Thank you. Thank you to Hillary and town staff and Aaron and Matt for all the work. This is very exciting. As Shauna and Councilmember Pallavi have said before, another tool in our toolbox, and just having more options for folks to be able to find a way to live here and stay here. I support the AMI level at 245. I'm also, though, in support of what Councilmember Pallavi just said, a potentially no cap. I don't think we should go any lower than 245. I do think it makes sense that it's at the same level as Placer County's program, so that way folks could qualify for both programs, potentially be looking for houses throughout our region, which would be great, and then they can stay here, whether they're a teacher or firefighter or whatever. I also agree with what Councilmember Pallavi just said regarding the ability to rent the house. I'm totally comfortable with allowing folks to do that. I think the goal is to get people to be able to live here. So it's, we don't need to force them to sell their house after 2 years if they decide they want to keep renting it to a local family that's doing great. I had similar concerns to Councilmember Zabriskie in your hypothetical about a low-level Google employee owning a house somewhere and being able to sell it and participate in this program, where a current somebody who lives and works in our community already would be restricted because if they own a house currently. So I almost feel like I would feel more comfortable to make it across the board. You can't have owned a house within a certain, within the last 12 months or something to that effect. I don't know how my fellow council members feel, but it just seemed like it's giving an unfair advantage to people from outside the area. And then I would be interested also, especially if we take away AMI cap, of having the discussion about, could there be some sort of your work site, at least one person in your house has to work within the Tahoe Truckee School District boundary. I know Andy said wouldn't want to make restrictions on you have to have been here for 2 years or anything like that, but if you're moving here because you want to work for the town and so you have a job, then you'd be eligible. If you've lived here for 30 years and you want to stay here, you'd be eligible. So I'd be interested to hear if my fellow council members have any viewpoint on that. With all that said, I do want to get this program rolling. I think it's important we get it out there and see what happens. So if talking about this makes town staff have to go back for 3 more months, I would just say, let's just roll with it. So I'd be curious to hear what other council members have to say, and then staff's response, if any of that would restrict us from getting the program rolling.
Maybe we could hear from Andy on your specific point, because then these guys can have a chance to comment specifically on that.
I think that could work.
You do think that could work?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you, Andy. Councilmember Klofstad.
So I like that approach that you just described, Councilman or Vice Mayor Romack. I do think that we really are trying to house people that are working here, not necessarily that are working and contributing in our community, not necessarily working for an outside employer. That would be ideal, but I'm also with you if it delays the program. I think the priority here is getting a program started. As for the 2-year excused absence, or however we were phrasing it, I honestly liked that, because I'm reflecting back, Vice Mayor Romack, on your kind of maturing through the housing stock. You start as renting a room, and then you rent a whole house, and then what we're really trying to create is that influx into the first home buyers. They're the ones that are really putting the seeds down in our community. So I want to make sure that there is an opportunity for these housing stocks to turn over if the people are not going to live here and work here and contribute to the community full time. That being said, I don't think it's not a necessity for me that it's part of this initial outlay. I understand and appreciate your concern, Councilmember Pallavi, with trying to make sure that it's as easy and simple as possible. Not just for the applicants, for the buyers, but the sellers and the administrator. And maybe if we're shooting for 10 or so deed restricted units a year, if we look at this again in a year or two, maybe, okay, what's the worst case scenario? We have 10 or 20 units that could abuse that, right? So I'm willing to accept that, but I still do think that the intention of this program, again, is to create that influx into the first home buyer and the maturation through our housing stock. And I do think we should align ourselves with Placer County's 245% AMI. That's exactly the point I wanted to make, that we want, again, to make this as easy and as accessible as possible. And the best way to do that is to synchronize these programs to the best of our ability so that they can be eligible in either area and hopefully find a home.
Thank you, Councilmember Klofstad. Councilmember Zabriskie.
Just on process, these guidelines aren't ready. Just alluding to the last point that Council Member Klofstad made, these guidelines are so confusing, they're going to impede all but the wealthiest buyers who have the accountants and the lawyers that can read through this. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll take Councilmember Klofstad out of this and just say these draft guidelines are not ready to be released into a program. It's not a question of spending the taxpayers' money to see how things will fly. In essence, open the door to subsidize the people at the upper level of the above moderate income, the ones that are making close to $200,000 a year as a family of four, get subsidized in acquiring a house. I'm happy to hear there's people here in Truckee who would like to sell their houses to a local worker and deed restrict their houses. They don't need the town to do that. They can go ahead and deed restrict it themselves and work out whatever kind of deal they want with a buyer who lives and works here. They can choose the buyer. They don't need the town to do that, and I hope they will. In terms of what I'm looking for the most deed restrictions for the same amount of money. And what I see here is an adequate supply of housing, an adequate demand that we can do that at an AMI that does a better job of targeting people that are between 100 and 195% AMI. It goes much more towards our workforce, the people working in our nonprofits and the upper levels of our nonprofits. It gets to the middle manager's salary in town, and that's what we should be focusing on by lowering the AMI. The big problem is doing this quickly and smoothly. For the people who aren't as keen on simply waiting, we need to have a process that makes our program competitive with the open market. I thought in terms of what's equitable in the situation, whether it's time to subsidize home purchases for the wealthier people. And what I discovered is through multiple programs, through property tax deductions, through mortgage interest deductions, through capital gain exclusions, through land use planning, we as a country, as a state, and therefore as a town, have been subsidizing large single-family homes. The big income earners get the biggest deductions off their marginal income rates under the existing system. And so part of this program should be directed at compensating for that. And that's the equitable thing in my mind. When this proposal originally came before the council, it was presented to us as trying to reach the 80% to 160% AMI population, and it was directed at the workforce. It has now morphed into being directed at the wealthiest. The lottery system that's being proposed here, in its attempt to be equal-minded, assures that the wealthiest among us, the ones who need this program the least, will have the same chance as those who need it the most. So I can see I'm not going to it doesn't look like I'm going to convince my other council members on lowering the AMI, but what I'm saying is we should get these guidelines cleaned up first if we want this program to work. Placer County has 245% AMI, and it is not working. And so we're just going to follow in lockstep behind it with our own more complicated, less clear process and expect a different outcome. And I don't think that's a chance we should be taking. I don't think we should be wasting staff time on it. I don't think we should be spending money on it.
Okay, anything? All right, thank you, Councilmember Zabriskie. I did want to circle back really quickly. Vice Mayor Romack, you had suggested this requirement to have one person in the household be a local employee as defined by living within the school district boundary. And I don't know if everyone got to weigh in on that. So
yeah, and I would make it clear, it would be, my thought was one person, yeah, their work site is within the school district boundary. So nothing about where they live currently. I think that's a distinction that Andy kind of made clear. So just to make sure, yeah, one person would have to work at a place that is within the school district boundary.
thank you. So Councilmember Pallavi, you're comfortable with that? Okay. You're comfortable with that as well? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so so in general, I'll just kind of give my thoughts on this, sort of in alignment with kind of how we've gone through some of these. So I do support the AMI level at 245% for alignment regionally throughout, throughout our area. I'm comfortable having a requirement for one person to have a workplace cited within the school district. I think that makes a lot of sense. I had liked the 2-year excused absence and sort of retaining that for the reasons that Councilmember Klostad raised. At the same time, it's not a hill that I feel I need to die on, so I'm also willing to compromise on that if you all feel really strongly about that. One other one that Vice Mayor Romack raised about not owning a house within the past 12 months, I definitely understand the concern there and a desire to have this. Again, though, I'm thinking about people going through that housing life cycle. So what if there's, a couple, they have a really small studio and they have a kid and they want to get a 2-bedroom. I want this program to be open to them. So I want this program to be open to them. So I just kind of want to say that out front. And then to Councilmember Zabrisky's comments, there is a lot of detail in the draft program guidelines. You're right. It is, it is not the most straightforward program because these types of programs just aren't the most straightforward types of programs. There is inherent complication. And so I think those details are really important to include, recognizing that, that adds length, that adds complexity to the guidelines. So all that said, I know we are not going to be in consensus on this, but I do feel like we probably have enough support for someone to give a motion. So would anyone?
Before we do that.
Go ahead.
So the way the program is currently written is if you own something within the school district boundary, you're not eligible. So if you own a studio in Truckee, you want to upgrade, you wouldn't be eligible. But if you own a studio in Sacramento, you would be eligible. So that was where my hang up was.
That's a good clarification. And I think I was reading it in the reverse.
And maybe Hillary, make sure we're reading it correctly.
Vice Mayor Romack, you are correct.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that we shouldn't. I think that entire clause should be scrapped for all of the reasons that we've now stated, right? Whether it's somebody moving from a studio to a 2-bedroom, you have a kid, you need a bigger play, whatever it is. So I guess my question along that is the administrator also an arbiter, right? Or is the administrator completely neutral and it is up to and once somebody is invited, so I guess what we never really got to was so I think what we're trying to solve is really important. And I would agree with saying, I don't care if people within the school district have owned a home, they can move up, right? I think that's also part of one of the biggest issues in our community is you can't get ahead, right? You're constantly behind. The second piece is the example, somebody from out of town, they lived in a lower cost area, they're moving to Truckee to be a firefighter, to work for the town, to be a nurse, I don't care, right? They also then have a need to move into our community at home prices that could be 2, 3, 4x what were in their previous community. Now, get to Councilmember Zabrisky's example of the remote worker who, is at those income levels, right? So I don't know how we slice and dice this, to be effective. This is part of the messy work, unfortunately. But to me, that's almost where either the administrator or, hey, we're going to invite you into the lottery. Like, how do you get invited into the lottery? I don't know. So I think that's the messiness, right? And so I'm in favor of exactly what you two are saying. I 100% support it. Councilmember Zabriskie, in doing his amazing due diligence, brings up the negative way that all works. So, is there a way to solve that in a clean and easy way, Andy, or do we just have to sort of allow the blunt instrument of what we do up here take its course?
I am wary of giving the administrator a lot of authority.
Right. So how do you get invited in? Do you have to prove that you're going to have a letter of intent from an employer, right? Because if we're going to add that issue, so if we go with what Mayor Henderson and Vice Mayor Romack are saying, where we're going to add one person in said deed restricted house, whether you're renting or you're the owner, has to work within school district boundaries. In order to enter the lottery, you have to also have that requirement or have a letter of intent from an employer in that would satisfy that requirement.
So the way that you typically avoid giving people what's called unfettered discretion, a phrase that Councilmember Zabriskie will be familiar with because the courts really don't like it, is that you have to try to come up with objective standards that address every possible scenario so that the person who's tasked with making the decision is not exercising discretion. They're simply following the objective standards that have been given to them. And that sounds good, but it's really hard to come up with objective standards that address all the possible scenarios.
But I like unfettered discretion.
So judges don't.
So are we solving that issue by saying whether in order to even be in the lottery or to hold a deed restriction or rent from somebody with a deed restriction, proof of employment within the school district and or letter of intent from an employer in said district are required to enter the lottery process and or take part in any other part of that. I think it's not as simple, I know, but trying to be clear.
And just to bring up another possible example, before I became the town attorney, I lived in Truckee and lived in Truckee for a really long time, but ostensibly my office was in Sacramento. I'd lived here for a long time, but on paper, my firm's nearest office was in Sac, so I wouldn't have qualified.
And we're not trying to necessarily help you then.
I know, but it would be really easy. I was telling Jen that anyone who kind of works from home, I think, would just say, oh, my company just opened up a branch office in my bedroom.
Fine.
Yeah.
I'm willing to deal with that.
So I think to your question about really we're coming down to a letter of intent to have a job here, or some kind of commitment that there's a job offer on the table is really the concern, right? If I'm moving to Truckee because I'm going to work in the school district boundaries and I want to enter the lottery, can I get a letter of intent that I have a prospective job here? I think we can probably work with that. It maybe is a bit more challenging if you're going to rent the property to somebody with a letter of intent, because what if something falls out?
Sure.
In there.
Well, and I think the rental programmatic guidelines are already baked in where they already are satisfying other requirements. So that's why I wasn't as concerned about that element of it. I'm more concerned with dialing in the details on what's being presented from how do you enter the lottery and how do you move up in your housing supply, how do you change your housing situation should you so desire, should these funds be available, blah, 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 blah.
So I feel like there's some sort of paperwork you have to fill out to get in the lottery. So that would be part of the paperwork to get in the lottery is a letter of intent or
proof of employment.
So I don't feel like that seems that challenging. It's one more piece of paper that the administrator will have to check for everyone, which I get if there's a ton of applicants, that's not nothing. But I think that makes sense. And the the more I'm thinking about this homeowner, maybe should there just be no restrictions on if you own a house now or you don't own a house now? Because there is you can't have more than 30% of the purchase value in liquid assets. So if you sell a house that's worth $1 million, you would assume you'd have more, or you paid off your debts like Councilmember Zabriskie.
To address a timing issue on the sale of the current home, I think we might want to look at adjusting the definition of liquid assets because it doesn't currently include current property ownership. So looking at the equity in any existing property as part of that consideration of 30% liquid asset.
That's going to be a disqualification right there. So I think all of this conversation is irrelevant to some extent.
If somebody has $500,000 in equity in their current home, I guess that's a question for council. Is that somebody who we should prioritize for participation in this program?
Right. I don't know that type of person who owns a studio is going to have $500,000 in equity. You might have $200,000 in equity, but yeah, I don't know. So what's the question before us? Is the question before us, it doesn't matter. So if you own a home and you're trying to upgrade said home, then does your existing property count towards liquid asset?
Correct.
The equity should, yes.
As currently written, it's not included in that definition. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong.
But we also excluded in the current definition. It wouldn't matter because we're excluding people who own a home.
Correct. Within
So
the
it doesn't
school
matter.
district boundary, yes.
Right. So if we're changing the fact that you own a home, so that's the crux of the question that we're trying to ask. Actually, is if we're going to change the fact that it doesn't matter if you own a home. We don't care if you own a home. How do you want to calculate equity? Is it a soft cost? So what's your answer to that? Does anybody? I mean, I would say yes. You have to count equity as part of that 30%. And I think then that makes this all moot.
That's their down payment. That's what they're contributing to this moving up.
Precisely.
A level.
You might not have a damn other penny, but you got that little bit of equity in that studio you bought.
And I would love to allow people to leverage that.
Yes. Yeah. But so you would agree to count equity in your current home as should be calculated in that 30%.
Yeah, because then it is assuming you are transitioning.
Precisely.
You are not buying another house.
Correctly. And I would agree with you. So I'm super comfortable with that too.
I am also comfortable with that. Vice Mayor Romack?
Is this feasible for program administration? Like how many more layers does it add to this as well?
I'll see if Matt wants to jump in on that one.
Sure. Yeah, we take home equity into account and as part of an asset test in some other programs. And it's really the burden is on the applicant to furnish a current fair market value and then the mortgage statement to calculate the equity that they do have in their property. So it's totally possible and not as burdensome as it might seem.
So I would definitely support that. I think I heard, you can summarize, I think I heard consensus for scrapping the 2-year rule up front at the very minimum, and then we can bring it back later on the rental issue. What else? So we have consensus on.
I heard the same. So I heard.
I'm gonna ask that you bring it back in 2 years.
Sure.
Sitting on
Me.
council.
To ask them. I'm not committing to that up here.
So, yeah, let me just summarize really quick. So I heard general support for keeping the AMI level at 245%. I know we're not in full consensus on that, but general support. General support for removing the 2-year excused absence requirement to just keep it more open, more flexible. General support for striking the home ownership within the past 12 months, we can strike that entirely. And of course, we just had the discussion about how equity would be calculated.
And are we adding the requirement for employment.
And yes, thank you so much. And adding a requirement for local employment.
And or letter of intent.
Letter of intent of local
whatever.
employment within the school district boundary.
And that's for one household member.
One household member.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few modifications. Okay.
Are we there?
I think we're there. Would one of, Councilmember Pallavi, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. So I will make a motion to approve the below market rate housing draft program guidelines with the 4 amendments, 5 or 4?
I'm counting 5
5.
from council plus the amendment to section 2.2B, adding in, which adds in the option to rent out a bedroom.
Right, because we needed to add that in. So with amendments, as discussed at the dais, including the section 2.2B, which is already in there. Do you need 2 motions, or can we do all of this at the same time through one motion? Our clerk has left the building.
You can do it as one if you can capture all of it in one.
Okay, so the motion, I will start from the beginning. Approve the below market rate housing draft program guidelines, including section 2.2B modification and the modifications listed from the dais, and direct staff to request proposals for a third-party administrator to operate the town's below market rate housing program.
May I have a second?
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
No.
Okay. 4 in favor, 1 opposed, so the motion does pass. Thank you, everyone. That was a really good discussion. I know there's a lot of detail on that one. Let's move on to 7.3. And before we do that, Aaron and Matt, just thank you again so much. I really appreciate you guys staying with us for this long one. Thank you. Okay, 7.3, acceptance of the quarterly financial report for the quarter ended December 31st, 2021. And I will turn it over first for our staff presentation.
Madam Mayor and council members, presenting the financial update for the quarter ending December 31st, 2021. So for a property tax update, we have received our first property tax payment. We typically receive 3 each year, and it's the first payment is usually around 55% of the annual property tax receipts. We received $7.1 million in secured property tax in the first payment. So if we do the math on that, we are projected to receive about $13 million for secured property tax, which is about $321,000 more than we budgeted. So that's some good news for you. Similar message for a sales tax update. Although we were down for the first quarter of 21-22, our sales tax auditor, Hinderlitter, Delamis and Associates, is projecting that we're going to hit $6.37 million for the year. We have only gotten the first quarter payment. It takes a long time for the state to collect and then remit to us, and then HDL still has to analyze the data. So we still have only received the first quarter, but just based on the way that the market is trending and our visitation patterns, they expect that we'll hit that 6.37 million mark. They think that we were down for that first quarter because of the wildfire event, but it's kind of hard to tell. So our budget for the year was $5.36 million. So some more good news, more cash than we were expecting. And then on the transient occupancy tax front, the STR team wasn't quite done analyzing the quarter ending December 31st, so I just have the first quarter numbers here. Oddly, we were up 14% for transient occupancy tax, so totally flipped, which same quarter, so we're not quite sure what happened there, but good numbers for us. And we do a projection, and if the town collects the 3-year average for the remaining 3 quarters of the year, we're expected to take in $4.8 million for transient occupancy tax. We budgeted for 4.2, so more good news. We also took a look at our salaries and benefits expenditures compared to our 4-year history. And for the first 2 quarters of the year, we typically spend about 45% of our salaries and benefits. We're trending about the same this year, about 44% through 12/31/2021. We did some estimated actual analysis to see where we think we're going to hit at the end of the year. There will be some divisions that are going to go over their personnel budgets, but based on what we expect for our salaries, our supplies and services budgets, we think that those overages will be covered in other, like savings from other line items in their budget within the same division. Those overages are due to employee turnover. They had retirement payouts for their accrued leave, or the increase in healthcare. In a few divisions, we did have some temporary help come in to help us get caught up from the cyber event. So nothing completely out of the ordinary, and we think we're still in good shape. So we plugged everything in. I know this graph is a little bit hard to read. There's a lot of information in there. We took the numbers straight out of the fiscal year 2021-22 operating budget. We added the previously approved budget amendments. Those are in the amendments and changes column. We did project a couple of those over the 5-year horizon for the CISO and IT systems analyst position. And then we also added in our updated revenue projections for property sales and transient occupancy tax. With those new numbers, our estimated ending cash available balance in year 5 is going to be $8.2 million, which is up from our budget number of $4.5 million. Again, these are just projections. We really only have like preliminary data, so I don't want everyone to get too excited, but this is good news, and we expect that this will help us cover the costs from our cyber event at the very least. So that's great news.
And that doesn't include ARPA projections?
ARPA is in a separate fund. They just think that we should track that separately for.
But it doesn't, that's not showing up in those total undesignated cash.
Correct. This is just the general fund.
This is just general fund. Yeah. Well, great.
So if there are no questions, the recommendation is for council to accept the quarterly financial report.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Councilmember Zabriskie, do you have any questions on this one?
Just one on the table at the very end. Nikki, I didn't ask this ahead of time, so I don't mean to put you on the spot. The capital transfers, do you remember offhand why the big increase in 23-24? See how it goes from 3.7 million to 5.9? That's.
So those are the general fund contributions to the CIP fund. Okay. I don't know which projects make that up, but we do. It could be the Truckee Legacy Trail 4, Section 4, or the Pioneer Roundabout, or something like that. So it's just that the timing of different projects. Maybe Dan knows.
Maybe Dan knows. Dan would know.
But
I probably do, but it's not coming to the top of my mind at the moment.
We can email to let you know what it is.
I take that as an answer.
Oh, yeah.
And so keep in mind, too, that this was based off what we projected when we did the last budget. So as we're going into the new budget cycle and updating CIPs, that number is likely going to be very different when you see the upcoming budget.
I'm mostly fixated on the increases, the about 1.7 million in revenue.
Yeah, and again,
the column I looked at.
Yeah, that's a lot of forecasting. We know there's a lot of changes in the world going on right now that could influence that greatly.
We could spend it next meeting. Right? Okay. Thank you. For the wealthy.
Okay, Councilmember Klobstad, do you have any questions?
Try to bring us back down to reality, getting a little punchy. This is great. I just anecdotally, since Dan is here and engaged with us, have we seen any changes in the, because one thing that I could see would make a big change is going to be cost of fuel and products that are petroleum based. And so have we seen a change in our renewable diesel price? Is that remaining steady?
It's tied to hydrocarbon-based diesel. So the pricing on renewable diesel is, historically it's been subsidized because the renewable diesel costs more. So there's been effectively clean air money in California that has subsidized the price of renewable diesel to put it on the same footing as hydrocarbon-based diesel. Mm-hmm. So whether the higher cost of hydrocarbon-based diesel effectively eliminates the need for that subsidy, I don't know. Mm. But someone at the state is saving money because that subsidy should be less at this point.
Somebody is saving money.
Somebody's saving money somewhere, but it's not us at the moment.
Maybe not us.
Right.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Romack, do you have any questions this evening?
No questions. Thank you for the detailed report.
Councilmember Pallavi? No questions. Okay, so I will open public comment, and seeing that we have no members of the public here with us any longer this evening, I will close public comment. Is there any council deliberation that we would like to have?
Just keep up the great work.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you so much. I think as a town, we've really prioritized fiscal conservatism, and we're continuing on that track, which is very, very good. So who would like to make a motion for this one? Councilmember Klostad, would you like to?
Yes, I move that we accept the quarterly financial report ending December 31st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes unanimously. 7.4, amending the municipal code to allow town council to serve as the building appeal body. And once again, I will turn back to staff for our presentation on this one.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to talk from here tonight.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, no problem. So the staff report pretty much outlines the details of how we recruit and manage the Building Appeals Board currently, and that's a item in our municipal code that directs us on how that's done. So what staff's asking is whether council would consider acting as that appeal body and saving the staff time associated with recruiting for that membership. And I say that only because currently there's been no other need for the Building Appeals Board. To date, they've never heard an appeal in the town of Truckee for a building official determination. So the only expense that the town incurs for this is the recruitment process. So the legislation allows the council to serve as that body and to act on behalf of, and judge whether the building official's determination is supportable or not. So we're asking you to consider dissolving that body by adopting the ordinance before you, 2022-01. That would change the municipal code and eliminate the Building Appeals Board and put you in the position of hearing any appeals that might come in the future.
Thank you, Judy. I think that one might be our most straightforward one this evening. Do we have any council questions on item 7.4? No questions at all? Okay, we will open public comment, and again, without any members of the public here, we will go ahead and close that right away. Any deliberations that anyone would like to have?
I just want to commend staff for finding this opportunity to create efficiency and fully support it. Let us know if you find anything else.
I realize now that in anticipation of the outcome of this motion, we will finally have an appeal of a building officer decision. Notwithstanding that, I'm speculating somewhat, but I hope the building working group has played some role in having this happen. I've attended enough meetings where they get together with people from other jurisdictions and they share the problems they have interpreting their ordinances and ask one another how they do it. And that kind of cooperation and coordination, I would think, plays a role in building officers making the right, consistent decisions. There are not so many people saying, well, they did it this way in another jurisdiction, so I'm going to sue you in this one. So kudos to the building working group, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 2022-01, amending section 15.02.270 of the municipal code to allow town council to serve as the building appeals board.
So you're going to introduce and waive that reading?
Just kidding. That's what I want to do.
And we're going to adopt it at your next meeting.
I'll make a motion that we introduce and waive the first reading of what I just said.
And I'll second that amended motion.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Agenda item 8.0, council reports. Councilmember Pallavi, would you like to start?
Sure. What have I done? I met with a couple of Visit Truckee Tahoe folks, both board and staff, as we sort of plan the next year's worth of action. So that was very productive. I listened in on the Mountain Housing Council's private business employer meeting. It talked mostly about co-housing. I did have to get off a little bit early, but really informative, and people were super fired up. And on a really other awesome note, just wanted to say kudos to the Truckee Donner Land Trust, because I got to go out to the Frog Lake Huts last week as well, and I encourage you all to go visit some of the amazing work they're doing, and that is just one of their really awesome amenities. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Romack.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of joining the Chiefs Advisory Committee along with Mayor Henderson and Jen. We got to go through some scenario training with the Truckee Police Department. It was fascinating. We got thrown into two situations and just how do you deal with them? So I really want to thank Chief Renfro and the police department. It was really great to kind of get a very small glimpse of what they can experience and the kind of training they go through, and just to get to know them on a more personal level and eat some pizza with them. So that was really fun. Also was at the Truckee North Tahoe TMA last week with Councilmember Zabriskie. There was a housing discussion. Mountain Housing Council and Emily Vitus with the JPA presented a lot of things we've heard about here. And then today I was listening into the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting where the supervisors were supportive of restarting the Cabin Creek Biomass Facility project evaluation for the feasibility of biomass at Cabin Creek. So I just thought, based on our conversation last 2 weeks ago, it's great that all these things are happening in our region. That's it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Romack. Councilmember Cliffstead.
Okay, I'm going to tag along on a couple of those. Speaking of Truckee Donner Land Trust, I hope everybody knows that Truckee Springs got expanded from its original 26 acres by an additional 41 acres. California Wildlife Conservation Board voted unanimously to dedicate this land to the Truckee Donner Land Trust, expanding that holding. I think it's also a testament to just how what a great job Truckee Donner Land Trust is doing in our community and managing those assets. We had a single-use foodware working group meeting yesterday where I think we came this close to finalizing the polystyrene ordinance that we intend to bring forward, and we began our discussions on reusable foodware in restaurants in our community, and we kind of ended on the deliberation of the definition of the different restaurants. So it's a surprisingly complicated discussion, but we're plowing through it, and we're looking forward to bringing that back to the rest of council. I tried to watch Good Morning Truckee this morning, but that didn't happen. And we did have some more discussions in the biomass group with Placer County, Nevada County, and it looks like we've found a consultant to prepare information for a grant proposal. Is that where we are with that, Hillary? Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
And the town is contributing $2,000 towards that consultant.
Correct. So the consultant is preparing regional information on sort of biomass green waste volumes and the characterization of the biomass product. Placer County is then using that information to support a grant for the Cabin Creek facility specifically.
So a lot of synergy happening on biomass right now. It's very exciting. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Zabriskie.
Yes. Ascent Environmental is our consultant on the general plan update, and I've been talking with members of Ascent on two items. One's the land use data. The council just not too long ago approved the preferred land uses for the environmental assessment, and GPAC's going to meet at the end of the month, or maybe in April. Maybe. Okay. Anyway, GPAC is back in action with surveys. In any case, they've provided information indicating that what we approved actually yields a much higher number of housing units than was reflected in the briefing book. But those numbers may not be the final numbers. So hoping to hear maybe in the course of GPAC what we actually approved in terms of the number of units yielded by the different densities we approved. On a separate matter with Ascent, working to find out what the data is, how they were able to quantify the GHG savings that would be achieved through the implementation of various strategies, and hoping to get that information. And then, as Councilmember Romack mentioned, we had two great presentations on housing, one from Tara Zuardo of the Mountain Housing Council, and then Emily Vitus for the Housing Agency. There was a Reach Code Committee meeting with Sarah Sherburne that I attended that has to do with reviewing the applicants, the proponents, or proposals for Reach Code consultants. There was a LAFCO meeting that was mostly about amending the sphere of influence for down around Nevada City, and then also annexing additional land to provide a spot for housing to fulfill their housing requirement. So essentially you had to do a sphere of influence expansion and an annexation in order to meet state housing requirements.
The RENA numbers?
I think it was RENA. It was some housing requirement from the state. And it may have been Grass Valley. And then there's a separate LAFCO meeting to continue virtual meetings and do a hiring. So TNT to Reach Code, LAFCO, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zabriskie. So I also attended the Single-Use Foodware Reduction Committee meeting, which Councilmember Klofstad summarized very nicely. Thank you. I attended the use of force training that we went through, and I want to say this was really eye-opening. I've always respected everything that our PD does, and I think that this just amplified that respect for me, recognizing sort of the inherent uncertainty they go into in every situation. When Vice Mayor Romack says we were thrown into scenarios, we were geared up and we were put in a traffic stop scenario that ended up being a mental health case, and then a domestic violence scenario, which was very violent. And Bob Womack is a very, very good actor and very scary when he acts in his scenarios. But just very impressed in how, the training that they have to go to also, be able to go into that inherent uncertainty all the time, to train to avoid complacency in it, how they
put their lives at risk. And I'm really looking forward to doing some ride-alongs with our PD in the near future to continue my educational journey and what they do and what their day-to-day looks like. I think lastly, I walked downtown with one of our local business owners. We talked about some of the issues impacting our downtown, particularly related to peak visitation periods. So litter, the trash compacting cans. Jen and Hillary, thank you so much for attending that. I really, really appreciate you coming down, and I know we're already working on some ideas and solutions for that area as well. I think that's it. So with that, I will adjourn us to our closed session, which we will now step into. Thank you, everyone.